She stood at the top of the staircase in a dress that cost more than most men in that room made in a year, and not one of them saw her coming. For 15 years, Vivian Ashford had been the most powerful secret in American organized crime, and nobody knew it. Not the senators whose careers Roman Viscari bankrolled, not the cartel bosses who shook his hand at border summits, not even Roman himself. They all saw the same thing, a beautiful woman standing 2 steps behind a dangerous man. They saw silk and pearls and a practiced smile. They did not see the mind behind it, the architecture of power she had built brick by brick in the dark, the financial nervous system of an empire that would have collapsed without her hands holding it together. Then Roman gave away her room, and Vivian Ashford walked out the front door. Every man in that house laughed. Not one of them would be laughing for long. What? If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what Vivian did next is going to change the way you think about power forever. The party had been Roman's idea, which meant it had been Vivian's execution. She had spent 11 days coordinating the event, the catering, the security rotations, the seating arrangements that kept 3 rival factions on opposite ends of the ballroom without any of them realizing they were being managed. She had sourced the Barolo from a contact in Piedmont she'd cultivated for 6 years. She had personally vetted the string quartet because Roman liked live music but hated anything that felt like a wedding. She had instructed the kitchen staff on the precise timing of each course so that the evening moved the way Roman preferred his world to move, effortlessly, inevitably, as though the universe itself had organized around his comfort. The Viscari estate sat on 42 acres of manicured Connecticut landscape, and on the night of the winter gathering it blazed with light from every window. 63 guests. 14 of them were men whose names appeared in federal surveillance files. 9 of them held elected office. The rest were a careful mixture of legitimate businessmen, financial intermediaries, and a handful of Roman's most trusted operational lieutenants, men who had been with him since before the Viscari name meant anything. Vivian moved through the rooms like water. She spoke to everyone and appeared to need nothing. She laughed at the right moments, touched elbows at precisely the right pressure, redirected conversations that were drifting toward dangerous territory with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it so long it no longer required conscious thought. She wore a gown the color of deep ocean water, and her dark hair was pinned at the back of her neck. And the single piece of jewelry she wore was a thin diamond bracelet that Roman had given her on their 5th anniversary, back when he still gave her things. She noticed Celeste Vaughn arrive at 9:14. She noticed because she noticed everything, and because Celeste had the particular quality of someone who wanted desperately to be noticed, the kind of want that vibrated off a person like heat off asphalt in July. She was 26, maybe 27, blonde in the way that required significant maintenance, beautiful in a way that was obvious and uncomplicated and precisely what it appeared to be, which Vivian had long understood was its own kind of power in certain rooms. She arrived on the arm of Marco Testa, one of Roman's mid-level money men, though the arm she was on was clearly not the arm she had come for. Vivian watched Celeste's eyes find Roman across the room. She watched Roman's face do the thing it did, the slight softening around the jaw, the almost imperceptible shift in posture. He was 51 years old, and he still thought he was invisible when he wanted something. He had never understood that wanting made a person transparent. It was one of the things she had used over the years when she needed to. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and continued her circuit of the room. By 10 o'clock, the dinner courses had landed and cleared with the precision she had designed. By 10:40, the conversation in the east drawing room had reached the kind of loose warmth that meant the evening was succeeding. Roman was holding court at the far end of the room, his natural habitat, the center of a circle of men who laughed too hard and agreed too readily. Vivian had positioned herself near the fireplace with Elena Caruso, the wife of Roman's longest-standing legal counsel, a woman Vivian genuinely liked, and whose company she sought on these evenings because Elena was sharp and funny and had absolutely no illusions about the world she inhabited. "The blonde," Elena said quietly, not looking at her. "I know," Vivian said. "Third time this month, he's brought her somewhere you'd be." "I know that too." Elena turned her glass slowly. "You're not going to say anything else, are you?" "What would I say?" Elena looked at her then. the kind of look that contained whole conversations, whole years of understanding between two women who had each married into a world that didn't leave a lot of room for honesty. "Nothing that would help," she finally said. Vivian smiled, and it was real, mostly. Exactly. It was 11:20 when Roman called for everyone's attention. He was good at this. The command of a room, the particular gravitational force of a man who had built his reputation on the understanding that his displeasure had consequences. The room quieted without him needing to ask twice. He stood at the base of the grand staircase with a glass of Barolo in his hand, and he smiled the smile he used when he wanted people to feel chosen, to feel as though his attention was a gift. He made remarks about the gathering. He thanked his associates for their loyalty and their discretion. He said several things that were funny and several more that were pointed, and the men in the room received all of it with the particular attentiveness of people whose interests were bound to his. Then he turned and his eyes found Vivian near the fireplace. "Vivian," he said, "come here." She came. Of course she came. She had been coming when called for 15 years. She walked across the room and stood at his side, and he put his arm around her, and for one moment she actually thought, with the part of her brain that still held remnants of who she had been at 29 when she married him, that he was going to say something true. Something that acknowledged, even obliquely, what they had built, and what it had cost her, and what it had cost them, and how far they had traveled from whatever they had once been to each other. Instead, he said, "I've been meaning to make an announcement about the East Wing." He said it pleasantly, conversationally, the way a man announces a renovation. He said that the private suite on the 3rd floor, the rooms that had been Vivian's exclusively for 12 of their 15 years together, the rooms where she kept her desk and her files and her reference library, and the particular silence she required to think, he said those rooms were going to be repurposed. He said this carefully, diplomatically, in the language of a man who believes that how something is said matters more than what is being said. But then he looked across the room at Celeste Vaughn, and the look was not careful, and it was not diplomatic, and every person in that room understood exactly what was happening. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then someone laughed. Vivian never identified who, and the 4 seconds became a different kind of silence, one that was thick with the specific discomfort of people who are watching something happen and are uncertain whether they are witnesses or participants. Vivian did not move. She felt the arm around her shoulders, and she felt the warmth of the fire, and she felt 63 pairs of eyes doing their various calculations about what her face was doing and what it meant and what she would do next. She had been in rooms like this her entire adult life, and she had learned, early and at some cost, that the face was the only thing you truly controlled when everything else was taken from you. She kept hers very still. Roman was still talking, filling the silence with logistics, with pleasantness, with the practiced ease of a man who had decided the conversation was already over. She heard him say something about renovations. She heard him say something about the new year. She heard Celeste's small, involuntary sound from across the room, not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp, the sound of someone receiving a gift they had been promised and were surprised to actually receive. Vivian reached up and removed her husband's arm from her shoulders. The motion was small. It was precise. She did it the way she did most things, without waste, without announcement, as though it were simply the logical next action following the previous one. She took a single step to the side, which put 2 feet of air between them, and then she turned to face him directly. Roman looked at her. Whatever he had expected, tears, a performance, the contained and dignified silence she usually deployed when he went too far, he had not expected what was actually on her face. Stillness. Not the stillness of someone holding herself together. The stillness of someone who has just made a decision and found it remarkably easy. She reached to her left hand. The diamond there. 4 carats, platinum setting, the one he had placed on her finger in a church in Manhattan on a September afternoon 15 years ago. She removed it with the same absence of ceremony with which she might remove a piece of costume jewelry at the end of a long night. She held it for a moment in her right hand. She looked at it, not with grief, but with something that might have been the satisfaction of a person who has just finished a calculation and confirmed the result. She set it on the small table at the base of the staircase. She looked at Roman once more. His face had done something complicated that she did not spend time interpreting. Then she looked at the room, not at individual faces, but at the room as a whole, the way a person looks at a landscape they are leaving, and she smiled. It was a good smile, composed and warm and absolutely genuine. "Good night," she said. And she walked to the front door, lifted her coat from the hook in the entrance hall where she had placed it herself 3 hours earlier because she had learned long ago not to trust her things to other people's care, and she walked out. She did not look back. She did not hesitate at the threshold. She stepped into the cold Connecticut night, and she heard the door close behind her, and then she stood on the stone steps of the house she had run for 12 years and breathed the winter air. It was sharp and clean and tasted like nothing. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, that she was standing in precisely the right place. Her car was where she had arranged it. It was always where she arranged it. She got in. The driver, a man named Curtis, who had been with her, not with Roman, for 9 years, who understood without ever having been told that certain things were not discussed and certain questions were not asked, put the car in drive and said nothing. They moved down the long gravel drive in silence, the mansion's lights receding in the side mirror, and Vivian sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the road ahead. And the first thing she felt, truly felt, was not anger and not grief, but something that she recognized after a moment as relief so profound it was almost dizzying. She had known this was coming. That was the thing none of them understood, and all of them should have. She had known because she had always known Roman's patterns better than he knew them himself, had mapped the arc of his attention and his restlessness, and his bottomless need to demonstrate dominance over whatever was closest to him. She had known for 8 months that Celeste Vaughn existed. She had known for 4 months that the situation had progressed beyond what Roman usually permitted himself. She had known for 6 weeks that he was building toward some gesture, some public declaration, because that was what he did when he wanted to make something real. He performed it in front of witnesses. She had not known it would be the room. That detail had surprised her, not hurt her. She had spent 3 years inoculating herself against the capacity for him to hurt her, had done it methodically and without sentiment, the way you might complete any necessary and unpleasant task. But it had surprised her, because taking the room was not just a personal cruelty, it was a strategic error of remarkable proportions, and she had not quite believed even Roman would make it. The room was where she worked. That was what none of them understood. The East Wing suite, with its private entrance and its filing systems and its secured communications equipment, was not a woman's sanctuary, not a place for baths and perfume and the decorative privacy that rich men grant their wives as a form of management. It was an operational center. It was the place from which she administered the financial architecture of an organization that moved $400 million a year through 9 countries and 37 shell corporations, and Roman had just announced in front of 63 witnesses that he was giving it to his girlfriend. She had felt, in that moment, something click into place. A decision that had been forming for years, slow and tectonic, had just completed itself. Curtis took the on-ramp toward New York, and Vivian reached into her coat pocket and removed her phone. She had 2 phones, had maintained 2 phones for 11 years. Roman knew about one of them. She opened the second phone and sent a single text message to a contact saved under the name M. Ellison, which was not the contact's name, and the message said only, "Tonight, set it in motion." Then she put the phone away and looked out the window at the dark highway and the distant lights of other people's lives scattered across the Connecticut hills. And she let herself feel the relief a little longer before she put it away too, and began, with the particular focus that had always been her greatest and most private strength, to work. The apartment she went to that night was not the Manhattan penthouse she and Roman maintained as their city residence. It was a smaller place, a 2-bedroom on the Upper East Side held in the name of a corporation that existed in Delaware and was owned by a holding company incorporated in the Cayman Islands that traced back through 4 intermediary structures to a trust established in Vivian's maiden name 9 years before she had married Roman Viscari. She had been 20 years old when she set up that first trust. She had been, at the time, a junior analyst at a private wealth management firm in Midtown, the kind of firm that handled the fortunes of people who preferred their fortunes to remain invisible. And she had learned very quickly and very thoroughly that the most important financial structures were always the ones that didn't appear to exist. She had been 20 when she learned that. She had spent the subsequent 20 years applying it. The apartment was clean and warm and contained exactly what she needed: a secure workstation, a fireproof filing cabinet, and a kitchen with actual food in it because she had maintained the habit. Through all the years of the Vescari household and its staff of 9 and its dinners catered by people whose entire professional purpose was to ensure she never needed to fend for herself, of knowing how to fend for herself. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter in her ocean blue gown and her diamond bracelet, and she drank the coffee and thought through the sequence of what came next. There was a knock at the door at 12:40. She had expected it at 12:30. The 10-minute variance was because Martin Ellison always parked 3 blocks away and walked, a habit he had developed during 20 years as a forensic financial investigator before Vivian had quietly redirected his talents toward more private applications. He was 54, gray-haired, built like someone who had once been athletic and had let it lapse without entirely losing the frame. He wore glasses he was slightly vain about and carried a leather briefcase that he had owned for so long it had conformed to the shape of his hand. "You went tonight," he said when she opened the door. Not a question. "I did. I watched the update come through, the ring. You have the suite monitored." "The East Wing has had passive monitoring for 3 years, Vivian. You know that." He came in and set the briefcase on the table and looked at her with the expression he used when he was deciding how direct to be. He had 3 expressions: professional neutral, cautiously direct, and the one he only used when he was genuinely alarmed, and he had settled on cautiously direct. "Are you certain about the timing?" "He made the timing," she said. "Not me. The Meridian accounts, the Falcone Bridge loans, the Kessler holding structure. If we move on all 3 simultaneously, it will be visible within 48 hours, maybe less. Roman has people who watch for movement. Roman has people who watch for movement in the accounts they know about." Martin considered this for a moment. He sat down at the table and opened the briefcase and began laying out documents with the methodical efficiency of someone who had prepared for this specific conversation at some length. "The legal transfer documentation is complete. Kessler Holdings, the Whitmore Property Group, the Abruzzi Fund Infrastructure, Coastal Meridian Partners. All 4 structures are titled to the Ashford Family Trust, not to Roman personally and not to any Vescari entity. He signed all 4 in 2019 during the refinancing, when he was not reading carefully. When his lawyer was on retainer to 3 firms Vivian Ashford controls, yes." She picked up the top document and looked at it. Roman's signature was there, wide and confident and slightly illegible the way powerful men's signatures always were, as though their names had grown too large for the space available. "And the Falcone Bridge loan? Collateralized against the Westchester properties, which are in the Ashford Trust. So when the loan calls, Roman has 60 days to refinance or the properties revert to the trust. He won't be able to refinance." Martin paused. "Not without your signature." She set the document down. Outside the window, New York was doing what New York always did at midnight, roaring quietly, insistently, indifferent to whatever was happening in any particular apartment on any particular street. She had always found it steadying, that indifference. "The Carrera relationship," she said. "Where are we?" "Diego Carrera has been in communication with the Ashford Trust directly for 14 months. He believes his partnership is with the holding structure, not with Roman personally. When we formalize that relationship under the new management structure, it will be a transfer of an existing agreement, not a new solicitation. He won't see it as a defection. He'll see it as a change of signatory." "Good." She picked up her coffee again. "The Hartwell political relationships. Senator Hartwell's campaign received 3 cycles of contributions from Meridian Coastal PAC. Meridian Coastal is controlled by the Ashford Trust. His office is aware of this. I received a call from his chief of staff 6 weeks ago. They were making preliminary inquiries about the trust's, quote, long-term governance structure. I believe they were asking whether Roman was actually in charge." "What did you tell them?" "I said the trust management was undergoing a strategic review," which was true. "Which is now complete," Martin said. She looked at him across the table. He looked back with the expression of a man who has spent years building something carefully and is now watching it become real. There was something in his face she recognized as satisfaction, and something else she recognized as the faint apprehension of a person who understands that what they've built is large enough to have consequences. "Martin," she said, "the federal investigation." He was quiet for a moment. This was the one where his expression shifted slightly toward the 3rd register, the genuinely alarmed one, though he contained it. The DOJ has been building a RICO case against Roman for 4 years. I have been in communication with the lead investigator's office through a cutout for approximately 2 years. They are aware that there exists documentary evidence sufficient to support the indictment, and they are aware that this evidence may become available to them through certain legal disclosure processes. When? The timing depends on us. If the Falcone loan calls, it triggers a legal discovery process in which certain documents held by the trust would become subject to disclosure requests. Once that process begins, it feeds itself. It feeds itself, he agreed. She nodded slowly. The coffee was cooling in her hands. She thought about the party, about the specific quality of the laughter that had followed Roman's announcement. The way sound in a room could tell you everything about a power structure, about who felt secure enough to laugh and who laughed because they were afraid not to. She thought about Elena Caruso's face by the fireplace. She thought about the ring on the table at the base of the staircase and about Roman's expression when she had set it down, the complicated thing his face had done, which she now had time to interpret, and which she interpreted as the specific surprise of a man who has spent 15 years believing he knows exactly what someone will do and has just discovered he was wrong. The Alderman property, she said, Chicago. Titled to Whitmore Property Group, which is in the trust. The Bresciano Restaurant Group. Funded through a Meridian Coastal loan in 2021. Collateral held by the trust. The cash reserve accounts. The 4 accounts Roman believes are his personal liquidity. Martin set down his pen. Vivian, tell me. Those accounts are held at Cayman First Private through the Alderman Holdings structure. The signatory authority is listed as the Ashford Family Trust as primary controller, with Roman Vescari as a secondary authorized user. He paused. He's been using them for 12 years, believing he's the primary. He's never read his own account documentation. He has people who read things for him. He has people whose employment agreements are administered by Meridian Coastal Partners. Martin looked at her for a long moment. Do you know what you've built? He said. I mean, I know you know, architecturally. I've watched you build it, but do you understand what it looks like from the outside? She considered the question genuinely. No, she said. Tell me. It looks like nothing, he said. From the outside, for 15 years, it has looked like absolutely nothing. It looks like a wife. It looks like a woman who manages dinner parties and keeps quiet in rooms full of dangerous men and smiles when she's supposed to smile. He gestured at the documents spread across the table. And underneath all of that, this entire structure. $400 million of assets and legal entities that he cannot touch without your signature. 15 years of relationship infrastructure, financial, political, operational, built through channels he doesn't know exist. And every single piece of it is legal. Every single document is clean. There is nothing here that exposes you to anything. That was the point, she said. I know it was the point. I'm saying the discipline it required, the patience. She thought about the patience. She thought about the specific texture of being invisible for 15 years in a world that would have been genuinely dangerous if she had ever been seen. She thought about the years of sitting in rooms and saying less than she knew, of building things in the margins of other people's attention, of performing. And it had been a performance, she was clear-eyed about that. The role of a woman who was present but not consequential. She thought about what it had cost her and decided she did not want to spend time on that calculation tonight. Begin the Falcone process in the morning, she said, which starts the clock. Which starts the clock. Martin began gathering the documents back into the briefcase with the precise movements of a man who had been trained to leave no traces. She watched him and thought about Roman in the mansion, whether the party had continued after she left, whether Celeste had moved through those rooms with the particular confidence of someone who believes they have won something, whether any of the 63 witnesses had understood what they had actually seen. None of them had. That was the operating assumption she had built everything on. None of them would look at Vivian Ashford walking out a front door and see anything but a woman who had been beaten. They would see retreat. They would see the particular graceful defeat of a woman who had too much dignity to make a scene. They would pour another glass of wine and return to their conversations, and the story of the evening would become, by morning, a small and satisfying piece of gossip about Roman's power and his wife's powerlessness. Let them tell that story. She had spent 15 years letting people tell easy stories about her. One more night cost nothing. Martin snapped the briefcase shut and stood. There will be a moment, he said, probably around the 48 to 72nd hour mark, when Roman realizes something is wrong. Before he understands what. That window. That window is the one where I'd be most concerned about your safety. I know. He has men who do things that aren't in any document. I have Curtis, she said, and 3 others you don't know about, and I have something Roman doesn't have. What's that? He'll be panicking, she said. I won't be. Martin almost smiled. He put on his coat. He picked up the briefcase. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame and turned back once, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has watched something construct itself over many years and has finally seen the finished thing. Good night, Vivian, he said. Good night, Martin. The door closed. She stood in the kitchen and finished her cold coffee and looked at the documents left on the table. A single sheet Martin had left intentionally, the one she needed to sign to formally initiate the Falcone collateral proceedings, the one that would set the clock in motion, that would start the sequence of legal events that would, within weeks, begin stripping from Roman Viscari the empire he believed was his. She picked up the pen Martin had left beside it. She looked at the signature line. She thought briefly and without sentiment of a September afternoon in Manhattan, 15 years ago, of a church and a crowd, and a man who had been, in those early years, genuinely brilliant and genuinely dangerous and genuinely, she had believed this. She had not been wrong to believe it. She would not rewrite history to make herself more cynical than she had been. Genuinely something like in love with her. She thought about what that had turned into and what the turning had cost and what it had built, because the turning had built something too, had built the specific iron she carried in her spine now, had built the patience Martin had tried to name. She signed the document. She set the pen down. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, and the city looked back, enormous and indifferent and full of people who were sleeping or working or falling in love or falling apart. And none of them knew that in a small apartment on the Upper East Side, the architecture of a crime empire had just been quietly, legally, irrevocably handed to the woman who built it. Her phone, the second phone, showed a delivery confirmation on the message to Martin. Below it, 3 other messages she had sent in the previous 48 hours to 3 other contacts in 3 other cities, each of them a single word or number that meant something specific within a system of communication. She had designed herself, and that existed in no document Roman Viscari had ever seen. She turned off the light. She went to bed. She slept without difficulty, which surprised her slightly, and then did not surprise her at all, because the thing she had been carrying for 15 years, the constant vigilance, the performance, the careful management of Roman's perception of her, that thing was gone now. She had set it down with the ring on the table at the base of the staircase, and she would not be picking it up again. In the morning, the clock would start. In the 48 hours that followed, Roman Viscari would make his first call to his accountant and receive an answer that would not make sense to him. He would make a second call, to a different number, and the line would ring without answer. He would open his laptop and attempt to access an account he had accessed 10,000 times and find that his credentials no longer worked. And in the specific cold silence of that moment, the moment when a man who has built his entire identity on the premise that he controls everything discovers that something is wrong, badly wrong, in ways he cannot yet name, Roman Viscari would feel, for the first time in 15 years, the particular weight of a question he had never thought to ask. He would begin to wonder about his wife. But by then, Vivian Ashford would already be 3 moves Roman Viscari did not sleep that night. He told himself it was the alcohol, the Barolo. 3 glasses of the scotch that had come out after midnight. The 2 fingers of grappa someone had pressed on him near the end of the evening when the party had reconvened in the billiard room with the particular forced energy of people pretending nothing unusual had happened. He told himself it was Vivian's theatrics that had kept his jaw tight and his eyes open in the dark, that the performance she had put on, the ring, the smile, the exit, had been exactly that, a performance, the kind of move a woman made when she wanted to be chased. He told himself these things in the bed they had shared for 12 years, and he did not believe any of them. At 4:17 in the morning, he got up and went to his study and opened his laptop and pulled up the Cayman First Private Portal. He had done this 10,000 times. The portal loaded and he entered his credentials, and the page sat for a moment with the particular blankness of a loading screen and then returned a single line of text that said, "Access credentials not recognized. Please contact your account administrator. He stared at it. He typed his password again, slowly, the way you do when you are certain you've made a typo, except that you are equally certain you have not. Access credentials not recognized. He picked up his phone and called Sal Minetti, his chief financial officer, a man he had trusted with the operational accounts for 11 years. The call went to voicemail. This was not unusual at 4 in the morning. He left no message and sat in the leather chair behind his desk and looked at the laptop screen and felt the first authentic, unmanaged pulse of something that might have been fear if he had allowed it to be named. He named it irritation instead, which was easier. He called his personal accountant at 7. The man answered on the second ring, which was his job, and said good morning, and Roman said the portal had locked him out of the Cayman account, and the accountant was quiet for a moment. A fraction of a second too long, Roman registered it, and then said he would look into it immediately and call back within the hour. He called back in 40 minutes. Roman. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has just received information they don't know how to deliver. The Cayman First accounts, the 4 primary accounts. The system shows them flagged for administrative review. What does that mean? It means the primary account controller has initiated a review process. It's an internal bank procedure. It freezes secondary user access while the review is in process. Roman's hand on the phone tightened slightly. I'm the account holder. Silence. Careful, deliberate silence. You are listed as secondary authorized user on those accounts, Roman. The primary controller is the Ashford Family Trust. The study was very quiet. Outside the windows, the Connecticut morning was gray and cold, and the bare trees stood against the sky like accusations. Roman sat with the phone against his ear, and he breathed, and the breathing was even and controlled because he was a man who had survived 23 years in a world that executed people for showing weakness, and whatever was happening inside his chest right now was not going to be visible on his face or audible in his voice. Get me Carver, he said. Carver was his attorney. His real attorney, not the public-facing litigation counsel, but the man who actually understood the structures. I'll reach out immediately. He ended the call and sat very still. The Ashford Family Trust. He knew the name. He had signed documents referencing it, many documents, over many years. He had signed them the way he signed most documents, after Carver's verbal summary and in the presence of whatever assistant or notary was required, because Roman Viscari was a man who understood power at the level of human dynamics, of leverage and loyalty and fear, and the granular mechanics of corporate structure had always been. He was willing to admit to himself in the privacy of his study at 7:40 in the morning the part he had trusted to other people, to Vivian's people, mostly, because Vivian understood these things, and because trusting her with the administrative architecture of the organization had always seemed like the most rational use of someone who was both genuinely skilled at it, and as his wife, financially and legally aligned with his interests. He sat with that thought for a moment. He got up and poured 2 fingers of scotch and drank it standing at the window and watched the trees and thought about Vivian's face at the bottom of the staircase. Not the composed smile, not the deliberate removal of the ring, but the moment just before that, when he had made his announcement and she had stood beside him and he had felt her go completely, absolutely still. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of hurt, the stillness of someone receiving confirmation of something they already knew. He had been so certain it would land differently. He had been so certain that the public nature of it would accomplish what he had been trying to accomplish for months. The establishment of a new order, the rearrangement of his household on his terms, the signal to Celeste that he was a man who acted rather than promised. He had told himself the gesture was for Celeste, which was true. He had not told himself the gesture was also for the room, for the 63 witnesses who would carry the story forward, who would know that Roman Viscari did as he pleased in his own house and answered to no one. He had not, in the construction of all of this, given sufficient thought to Vivian's response. That was the error. He understood it now with the cold clarity of early morning and insufficient sleep and a scotch that hit an empty stomach with punishing speed. He had spent 15 years watching Vivian manage situations, watching her calm rooms, redirect conversations, absorb pressure, and transform it into something functional. And he had understood this as a talent she deployed in service of his needs. And he had not understood, because it had not been in his interest to understand, that a talent deployed in service of someone else's needs could equally well be deployed in service of her own. Carver arrived at 9:15, and the look on his face when Roman opened the door told Roman that Carver had already been making calls. "Close the door," Roman said. "I've been in contact with the bank," Carver said. He was a small man, neat and precise, with the demeanor of someone who had spent his career in the company of violent men and had survived by being absolutely, consistently useful. He sat across from Roman in the study and set a folder on the desk and opened it with movements that were controlled enough to be effortful. The Cayman First accounts. The review was initiated yesterday evening. The timestamp on the administrative action is 11:38 p.m. Roman did the math. 17 minutes after Vivian had left the party. Who initiated it? The Ashford Family Trust, the trust's administrator of record, is a Martin Ellison, operating through a fiduciary firm registered in Delaware. Carver paused. "I've been trying to identify Ellison's background. He's a forensic financial investigator. He was in private practice for 20 years before, apparently, moving to a more specialized role." Another pause. "I don't have records of who employs him currently." "Vivian." Carver looked at him across the desk. "That would be my conclusion, yes." Roman stood up and walked to the window and then turned back around because standing still wasn't an option. The 4 Cayman accounts. What's in them? As of the last statement, approximately $41 million in combined liquid assets. The accounts also serve as the operating reserve for 3 of our core distribution structures. She can't just lock me out. Roman. Carver's voice was careful. The account documentation designates the Ashford Trust as primary controller. In the event of any dispute between the primary controller and secondary users, the bank's protocol is to honor the primary controller's instructions. This is standard language. I reviewed these documents when they were originally structured. And at the time I understood the trust to be a holding vehicle whose effective controller was you. Because Vivian administered the trust and Vivian was... He stopped. "My wife," Roman said. "Yes. And it turns out, Carver said, that the trust was structured to give Vivian Ashford independent control. And I need to tell you, Roman, that the more I have looked at these structures this morning, the more I am finding similar arrangements across the portfolio. Whitmore Property Group, Kessler Holdings, the Abruzzi Fund Infrastructure, Meridian Coastal Partners." He opened the folder further and laid documents on the desk with the air of a man performing a task he would prefer to be performing for someone else. In each case, the corporate structure places the Ashford Trust in a position of primary ownership or controlling interest. Roman is listed variously as secondary signatory, authorized operator, or beneficial user. The room was very quiet. "Say that again," Roman said. "You are not the legal owner of those entities," Carver said. "The trust is." Roman looked at the documents on his desk. He had signed every one of them. He could see his own signature, large and confident and certain, on page after page, the signature of a man who never doubted that the world he moved through was the world he owned. He stood there and looked at his own name written in his own hand, and felt something he had not felt in so long he almost couldn't identify it. He felt like a fool. The feeling lasted about 4 seconds before it became something else. Something hotter and less complicated, something that moved through his chest and his jaw and his hands, with the specific quality of a thing that had been humiliated and wanted to make something suffer for it. He picked up his phone. He called Vivian's number, the number he knew, the number she had always answered. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He did not leave a message. He called again. Voicemail. He set the phone down on the desk with deliberate care. "Find her," he said to Carver. "Roman. Find out where she is. She has an apartment. She has that Upper East Side place she uses when she stays in the city. Send someone." Carver was quiet for a moment. "I would advise very strongly against any action that could be characterized as, 'I said find her.'" Carver closed the folder. He looked at Roman with the expression of a man who has given advice and watched it be rejected and has filed the moment away against future necessity. "I'll make some calls." He left. Roman stood alone in his study and looked at his name on the documents and thought about the party, about Celeste across the room, the small sound she'd made, the look she'd given him afterward that said, "I can't believe you actually did it," the way she had put her arms around his neck in the billiard room later when the remaining guests had thinned and said, against his ear, "She's gone, Roman. She's actually gone. He had felt, in that moment, the particular pleasure of a man who believes he has finally resolved a situation that has been quietly strangling him. He had been celebrating a thing he had not yet examined. He called Sal Minetti. This time, Sal picked up on the first ring, which meant Sal already knew something. "The Falcone bridge loan," Roman said, without preamble, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I was going to call you this morning. Tell me." "I got a notification from the loan servicer this morning at 6 a.m. The collateral structure, the Westchester properties backing the Falcone loan. There's been an administrative change of contact. The collateral holder of record is now listed as the Ashford Family Trust, and the trust has filed a notice of primary lien assertion." Roman sat down. He had not meant to sit down. His body did it without consulting him. "The Falcone loan is $7 million. 8.3 with the rolled interest. And if the collateral holder asserts primary lien, the whole structure accelerates. The full balance is due within 60 days unless we can refinance, and refinancing requires the collateral holder's agreement." "Yes." Silence. Roman could hear Sal's breathing on the other end of the line, the careful, measured breathing of a man who is afraid of the person he is talking to and is trying not to sound afraid. "How long have these structures been set up this way?" Roman asked. Another silence. Longer. "I don't know exactly. I've been looking at the documents this morning, and, Roman, some of this goes back to 2017, some of it earlier." "You didn't know?" "I handled the operational cash flow, the corporate structure. Vivian managed that side. I didn't—" He stopped. "No, I didn't know." Roman ended the call. He sat in the chair behind his desk for a long time, long enough for the morning to advance from gray to a cold and flat brightness that lit the room without warming it. Long enough for the scotch to move through him and leave behind the particular flatness that follows a drink taken too early on an empty stomach. Long enough for the first shape of what had actually happened to assemble itself in his mind. Not the details, not the full architecture, but the outline, the silhouette of a thing he had been living inside of for 15 years without seeing it. She had built it around him. That was the only way to put it. While he had run the organization, the men, the relationships, the enforcement, the territorial negotiations, the alliances built and broken and rebuilt over 20 years, she had been building something else, something quieter and more permanent, something that did not require violence or loyalty or fear because it was constructed entirely from documents and legal structures and the particular invisibility of a woman that no one in his world had ever thought to look at too carefully. I thought about how many rooms he had been in where Vivian was also in the room, and how completely he had trusted that her presence there was, at its core, supportive, supplemental. The way infrastructure was supportive, you didn't think about it until it stopped working. His phone rang. It was Marco Testa, the man who had brought Celeste to the party, which now seemed like a detail requiring re-examination. "Marco." "Roman." Marco's voice was wrong. It had the quality of someone calling to say something they had decided they had to say. "I heard about last night, about Vivian." "What about it?" I wanted to reach out. I have some of my accounts through the Meridian Coastal structure, and this morning I got a communication about a management change, and I was wondering if you could—" "What kind of communication?" "A letter from the trust administrator of record. It says that effective immediately, the management contact for accounts held through Meridian Coastal Partners is an M. Ellison, and if I have questions about the transition, I should direct them to an email address that I don't recognize." Roman said nothing. "Roman, my accounts, my personal reserve accounts, the ones Vivian helped me set up 3 years ago. Are those in the Meridian structure?" "Call Carver," Roman said. "Roman, call Carver." He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand and counted. By noon, he had received 7 similar calls. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the number was 11. Men he had known for years. Men whose financial arrangements touched the structures that Vivian had built and administered. Men who had accounts and investments and debt instruments woven into a system they had trusted because Vivian managed it, and Vivian was Roman's wife, and Roman's word was the only guarantee that mattered. These men were calling him to describe administrative changes and management transitions and access issues, and in each call was the same note: underneath the careful phrasing, underneath the professional courtesy. A note of something that was not yet accusation, but was moving steadily in that direction. At 3 o'clock, Dante Falcone called. Dante Falcone was 61 years old and had been in the New York organization since before Roman had any position in it, and he did not observe the diplomatic conventions that younger men used when calling someone they were angry at. He said Roman's name, and then he said, "My money." "Dante, 8.3 million, Roman, my money, in a loan structure that I agreed to because you told me it was secure. Now I'm being told the collateral is under review by a trust I've never heard of, and I'm looking at an acceleration notice for the full balance. My money. It's being handled. Handled how? By who?" Dante's voice was the voice of a man in his 60s who has spent his entire adult life in a world where money and violence were the same conversation, and who had never in 61 years allowed anyone to have leverage over him without consequence. "Is Vivian handling it because the letter I got this morning has her trust's name on it, and I am trying to understand whether I am having a problem with Roman Viscari or a problem with Vivian Ashford, because those are two very different problems, and I need to know which one I'm solving." Roman's jaw was tight enough that the words came out flat. "You're not having a problem with anyone, Dante. Give me 48 hours. The silence on Dante Falcone's end of the line lasted long enough to be its own answer. 48 hours, he said finally. Then I come to the house. The call ended. Roman set the phone on the desk and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed. Through his nose, slow, the breathing exercise he had learned from a man who was now dead. A man who had taught him that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation was the moment when anger and panic arrived simultaneously, because they felt like energy, but they produced errors, and errors in his world had a specific and terminal cost. He breathed. He thought. He thought about what Vivian needed. She needed him destabilized. She had the destabilization running now, the financial pressure, the calls from associates, the acceleration notices. She was using it to force a position. That was what you did when you had leverage. You applied it to produce a specific outcome. What outcome did she want? Settlement. She wanted the legal structures transferred cleanly, the entities signed over, the separation formalized in a way that protected her position. She would have attorneys. She would have the documentation prepared. She was waiting for him to reach out and begin negotiating. That was what she thought would happen. He stood up from the desk and went to the window and made a decision. The kind of decision that was made in the gut before it reached the brain. The kind that felt like clarity, even when it was the opposite. He was not going to negotiate. He called a man named Briggs, not a lawyer, not a financial consultant, a man who solved problems that couldn't be filed in court, and said 4 words, "Find Martin Ellison, now." He called his longest-standing captain, a man named Vic Parrish, who had been with him since the Bronx in 2003, and said, "I need to know everything Vivian did in this organization, who she talked to, what accounts she touched, what she moved and when. I want it in 48 hours. He called his contact in the city assessor's office and asked for a flag on any real estate transactions connected to the name Ashford or the Ashford Family Trust. He felt better. Action always made him feel better, which was one of his genuine flaws and which Vivian had understood and managed for 15 years, and which he was only now recognizing as one of the instruments she had played. The call he did not make, the one he thought about making and set aside, was to Senator Hartwell's office. He had tried that number at noon, after Carver had mentioned the political relationships, and the senator's chief of staff had been cordial and vague in the specific way that meant the senator was waiting to see which way things settled before committing to a position. That particular vagueness had told Roman more than a direct statement would have. The senator was not sure Roman was still worth being loyal to, which meant someone had already been in the senator's ear, which meant Vivian had not begun this process yesterday evening at 11:38. She had begun it earlier than the party, earlier than the ring, earlier than whatever Roman had believed was the timeline of this situation. He was standing in the window looking at the gray Connecticut afternoon when Celeste arrived. He had forgotten she was coming. She had called at noon and he had said yes without thinking because the call had arrived between 2 of the other calls, and he had been operating on a kind of automatic function. She came in with the particular brightness of someone who had not yet received the information that the morning had contained, someone still operating under the previous night's understanding of events. She was wearing a camel coat, and she smelled like the perfume he had bought her in October, and she put her arms around him and said, against his neck, "We need to talk about the room. I was thinking the furniture." He stepped back. Not harshly, but definitively. She looked at him. Her face did the recalibration that happened when someone walks into a room and finds a different emotional atmosphere than they were expecting. "What's wrong?" "Sit down," he said. She sat. He looked at her for a moment, 26, maybe 27, beautiful in the uncomplicated way he had been drawn to, genuinely drawn to, the specific contrast with Vivian's complicated dark intelligence that he had mistaken for simplicity. And he thought about the room he had promised her, and the rooms he might no longer have the authority to promise anyone. "Vivian has been, there are some financial matters," he said, "structures that I'm working through. It may take some time before the house situation is—" "Financial matters," Celeste said. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before, something careful and assessing. "There are legal structures that need to be addressed. It's temporary." She looked at him. She had blue eyes, and they were, in this moment, doing a calculation that he recognized because he was used to seeing it in the faces of men in business meetings, not in the faces of women he was sleeping with, and the recognition of it landed with an unpleasant jolt. "How temporary?" she said. "I said I'm handling it." She looked down at her hands and then back up at him, and the calculation had completed. "Roman, the reason I was with Marco at the party—" "I know why you were with Marco. I've talked to Marco about the situation. My situation. He told me that your financial arrangements were—" She stopped, restarted. "He said they were solid." "They are solid." She looked at him with the eyes of a woman who is deciding, in real time, how honest to be, and he watched her decide to be honest, which told him that the calculation had already landed on a conclusion. Marco also said that if anything changed— "Nothing has changed." His voice had an edge in it now. "Not for you." She held his gaze, held it long enough that he understood she was doing what Vivian used to do in these moments, holding it long enough to make a point without saying the point out loud. Then she picked up her coat from the arm of the chair and stood up. "Call me when you've handled it," she said. She walked out. He heard her heels on the floor of the entrance hall. He heard the door open and close. He stood in the study of his house, and the house was silent, and he realized, entirely alone in it for the first time in 15 years. And the silence had a quality he had not anticipated. Not peace, not freedom, but something that felt remarkably like exposure. Like standing in a room with no walls. His phone rang at 7 p.m. He answered it because the number was Vic Parrish's, and Vic did not call without a reason. "Tell me," Roman said. "I've been through what I can access," Vic said. He sounded tired. The specific tiredness of a man who has spent a day learning things he would have preferred not to know. "The accounts she managed directly, the correspondence I can find. Roman, the level of access she had. Tell me what you found." "Diego Carrera," Vic said. "She's been in direct communication with Carrera's office for over a year, through a trust-related entity, not through any of our structures. And Carrera's people responded to me this afternoon when I asked about the shipment calendar." A pause. "They told me that all logistical questions should be directed to the Ashford Trust's administrative office." Roman said nothing. "The Hartwell PAC contributions," Vic continued. "I talked to someone in the senator's office, a low-level guy, not the chief of staff. He said the senator is traveling and not available, but he also said something that Roman, he said the senator's office received documentation last week about a change of primary relationship management on their account. Before the party. Before last night. This was already in motion before she walked out that door. Before the party." Roman sat down in the chair that was closest to him, which was not his desk chair, but the armchair by the window where he sometimes read in the evenings. The chair where Vivian had sometimes sat across from him and discussed the week's matters in the quiet hour before dinner. And he felt the full, unmanaged weight of what he was understanding settle into him. She had not decided last night. She had not been provoked into action by his announcement. She had been moving for months, for over a year, possibly longer, arranging pieces with the unhurried precision of someone who is in absolutely no rush because they already know how it ends. Last night had not started anything. Last night had been the moment she chose to let him see it. "Vic," he said, "the documents, the corporate ownership documents. I need everything Carver has, everything in our files that touches the Ashford Trust or any Ashford entity. Everything. I've already started pulling them. And I need to know where she is." Silence. "Roman, I have to say something. Say it. Whatever you're thinking about doing right now. I'm telling you, as a man who has been with you for 20 years and who would like to be standing next to you in another 20, don't." Vic's voice had the quality of someone who is being very careful and very honest at the same time. She has the legal structures. She has the paper. If you go at her the other way, the way we know how to go at people, you hand the federal case everything it needs to put you away. She's got paper and you've got nothing, and if you touch her, the paper becomes the prosecution's opening exhibit. Roman gripped the phone. "I hear you," he said. "Roman, I said I hear you." He ended the call. He sat in the armchair and the house was quiet around him, and outside the windows the Connecticut night had come down fully, black and cold and indifferent. He thought about 41 million in locked accounts. He thought about an $8 million loan that was about to accelerate. He thought about Diego Carrera and Senator Hartwell and Dante Falcone and the 11 men who had called him that day with variations of the same fear in their voices. He thought about the specific silence of a senator's chief of staff. He thought about Celeste's eyes doing their quiet arithmetic before she picked up her coat. He thought about Vivian in her ocean blue dress setting the ring on the table at the base of the staircase, and the particular quality of her smile when she looked at the room one last time before she walked out, and the thing he had read as grace or dignity or the controlled exit of a woman who had lost and knew it. He understood now what that smile had actually been. It had been the smile of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a thing to be finished and has finally watched it become finished and finds the feeling exactly as clean as they always believed it would be. He picked up his phone and called Briggs. "Ellison," he said, "drop everything else. I need him found tonight." Because there was one move left that did not require paper or legal structures or the cooperation of men who were already quietly recalculating their loyalties. There was one move that had always worked, in 23 years, when everything else had stopped working. Briggs said he'd have a location by morning. Roman said that was too long. And somewhere in a secured apartment in New York City, a phone registered to a contact saved as M. Ellison buzzed once with an incoming alert, the kind generated by the passive monitoring software that a forensic financial investigator maintained on all of his personal devices, the kind that registered when someone began running his name through certain databases. And Martin Ellison picked up the phone, read the alert, and sent a single text to a contact saved as VA. Martin Ellison moved the timeline up. What that meant, in practical terms, was that he did not sleep on Tuesday night either. He sat in the back office of a small accounting firm on Lexington Avenue that served, among its legitimate functions, as the administrative address for 4 of the Ashford Trust subsidiary entities. And he worked through the night with 2 associates he trusted absolutely, a woman named Park, who had spent 8 years at the SEC before Vivian had quietly redirected her expertise, and a man named Osei, who handled the legal filing architecture, and who could move documents through Delaware and Cayman registration systems with a speed that still, after 4 years of working together, slightly surprised Martin. By 5 a.m. Wednesday, they had filed 3 additional legal instruments. The first formalized the Ashford Trust's assumption of primary management authority over Meridian Coastal Partners, replacing the operational signatory structure that had listed Roman as active director. The second initiated a legal discovery request through a Delaware court, compelling the production of all documents related to the Whitmore Property Group's founding structure, a filing that appeared to anyone examining it to be a routine corporate governance matter, and which Martin knew would land on the desk of a specific assistant U.S. attorney within 72 hours. The third was a notice to the Falcone loan servicer that the collateral review was complete and the acceleration clock was now formally running. 60 days, 8.3 million, no refinancing pathway that Roman could access without Vivian's signature. Martin sent the text to VA at 5:47, and then he stood up from the desk and rolled his neck and listened to it crack and thought about the alert his monitoring software had generated, the one that told him someone was running his name through databases that were not public. He had 3 people with the technical capability to do that kind of search on his behalf. He needed to know which one Roman had reached, and more importantly, how long it would take them to find a physical location. He thought he had until morning. He was planning to be elsewhere by morning. He called Vivian at 6. She answered on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. "The filing is done," he said. "I saw the confirmation. He's running my name. Whoever he hired is competent. It's not a simple database query, it's a deeper pull. Surveillance, registrations, property records, vehicle. How long? If they're good, 8 to 12 hours. If they're very good, less." A pause. He could hear her moving. The specific sound of someone in a room, shifting weight. The small sounds of a person who is thinking with their whole body. The Lexington office. "I'm leaving now. Park and Osei are already gone." The documents. Filed and cloud-backed. "There's nothing physical here that matters." Another pause. Longer. "Martin. The Carrera situation." He sat back down. This was the conversation he had been waiting for since Monday night. The one he had known was coming because the Carrera situation was the one variable in the entire architecture that he had never been entirely comfortable with. The one piece that depended not on legal structures or documented agreements, but on a human being's willingness to stay in a chosen position when pressure was applied. "Diego Carrera's representative called me this morning," he said. "What time?" 4:15, which means Carrera didn't sleep either. "What did he say?" "He said that Carrera appreciates the relationship with the trust. He said that Carrera understands the transition of management. He also said," Martin paused, chose the words carefully. "He said that Carrera received a call from Roman Viscari at midnight on Tuesday, and that Roman made certain representations about the trust's stability and about Vivian's his word was reliability, and that Roman offered Carrera a direct partnership arrangement that bypassed the trust entirely." The silence on Vivian's end was brief and absolute. "What did Carrera say to Roman?" she said. "He didn't commit. He told Roman he needed time to consider." "Which means he's waiting to see who's still standing in a week." "Yes," she breathed. He heard it. One slow breath, in and out. The breath of someone absorbing information and deciding what to do with it. The Carrera shipment calendar. The February run. Scheduled through our logistics structure. If Carrera realigns with Roman directly, he reroutes. We lose the transit margin and more importantly, we lose the documentation trail that demonstrates continuity of the legitimate business relationship, which I need for the transition. "Which you need for the transition," Martin confirmed. "Without the Carrera documentation showing continuous relationship with the trust as business entity, Roman's attorneys can argue that the trust was always just an administrative vehicle and that the real business relationship was personal to Roman. It weakens the ownership claim on the operational side." "He knows that," Vivian said. "He might not know it explicitly, but someone told him about Carrera and that someone understood what Carrera represented to us. Roman doesn't think in legal structures." "No," she said, "but someone around him does." Martin was quiet for a moment. This was the thing he had been circling since 4:15. "Carver has always known more about the trust structure than I was comfortable with." Carver reviewed the documents. "Carver reviewed the documents, and I have always believed he understood them less than he appeared to. But if Carver has had 48 hours with those documents and a reason to read them differently, he would have found Carrera." "He would have found Carrera," Martin said. "And he would have told Roman." She was quiet for long enough that Martin looked at his phone to confirm the call was still connected. "The Delaware filing," she said finally. "How quickly does it reach the U.S. Attorney's Office?" "Standard processing, 72 hours, but I have a direct accelerate it." "Vivian, if I accelerate it, the discovery request becomes visible to Carver within 24 hours. He'll know the federal process has started. Roman will know." "Roman already knows I'm moving," she said. "He just doesn't know how far. Let him see the federal piece. Let him understand that the clock isn't just financial." Martin considered this. It was not the cautious move. But it was, he thought, the correct one. The move of someone who had decided that the longer this stayed below Roman's full understanding, the more room Roman had to maneuver in the dark. Better to bring everything into the light. Vivian had always been better in the light than Roman. She had spent 15 years proving it. "I'll accelerate it," he said. I'll have a location update for you by 9. He ended the call and began shutting down the office. He did not make it to 9. At 8:17 a.m., Martin Ellison stepped out of the Lexington Avenue office building and walked half a block toward the parking garage where he had left his car, and two men fell into step beside him, one on each side, close enough that the contact was unmistakable, not close enough to be assault. He kept walking. His heart rate went up, but his stride did not change because 20 years of working in environments adjacent to violent men had installed certain reflexes, and the first reflex was never break stride. "Mr. Ellison," the one on his left said. He was wide across the shoulders and wore a dark coat, and his voice was the voice of someone who did not require volume to convey intent. "Mr. Vescari would like a conversation." "Mr. Vescari can contact my attorney," Martin said. "Mr. Vescari is in the car," the man said. "It's a short drive." Martin looked at the parking garage entrance 20 feet ahead. He calculated the variables with the speed of someone who had spent a career calculating variables, and the calculation produced a result he didn't like but understood. These men were not going to hurt him on a public street at 8 in the morning. Whatever Roman wanted from him was information, not punishment, which meant the conversation was preferable to the alternative, which was spending the next several weeks looking over his shoulder for a second approach under less public circumstances. He got in the car. Roman was in the back seat. He looked like a man who had not slept in 2 days, which was accurate, and who had spent those 2 days discovering that his understanding of his own life was incorrect in fundamental ways. There was something in his face that Martin had not expected. Not rage, not the hot explosive anger of a man who wanted to break something, but something colder and more controlled, the expression of someone who has moved through rage into a territory on the other side of it. That, Martin thought, was more dangerous. "You built it," Roman said. "Not a question." "I administered it," Martin said. "Vivian built it." "How long?" Martin looked at him. Roman's hands were flat on his thighs, very still. The car was not moving. The two men from the sidewalk were in the front seat, and the partition was up. "The first structures were in place before your marriage," Martin said. "The Ashford Trust predates your relationship by 4 years." Something moved across Roman's face, a brief, involuntary thing that he contained almost immediately, but that Martin caught and identified. Not surprise at the timeline, but the specific pain of a man who has just been handed a piece of information that reframes everything he thought he knew about a relationship. The calculation was visible, even through the control. 4 years before the marriage, which meant the architecture had not been built in response to Roman. It had been built in preparation, which meant Vivian had arrived in Roman's life already holding a structure designed to be invisible inside whatever came next. "She married me with a plan," Roman said. "She married you with a foundation," Martin said. "What she built afterward was in response to what she found." "And what did she find?" Martin considered how honest to be. He was in a car with a man who had people, and he was aware of that with the same constant background awareness with which he was aware of everything in environments like this one. But he was also aware that the level of honesty he deployed in the next 10 minutes would determine whether this conversation ended with him walking out of the car or not. "She found an organization that was financially brilliant in some ways and catastrophically fragile in others," he said. "No legal insulation, no structural separation between the criminal operations and the legitimate assets. Everything was held personally by Roman Vescari, which meant that any federal action against Roman Vescari would seize everything, the businesses, the properties, the investment funds. She found an empire with no roof. So she built the roof. She built the roof. And she built it the way she builds everything, under her name, through structures she controlled, because that was the only way to build it without it being seized the moment anyone looked at it. Roman was quiet. He looked out the window at the street. The ordinary morning business of New York moving past the tinted glass, people walking, a delivery truck double parked, a woman pushing a stroller with the particular purposeful speed of someone running 5 minutes late. The world entirely indifferent to the conversation happening inside the car. "Carrera," Roman said, "is a business relationship of the trusts. He was my contact first. He was introduced through your network, yes. The relationship was formalized through the trust structures, because the trust structures were the ones that could hold a formal relationship without federal exposure. Carrera has known for over a year that his primary administrative relationship is with the trust." Did he know it wasn't with me? Martin paused. This was the one he had to answer carefully. He knew that the legal entity he was contracted with was the Ashford Trust. Whether he understood the personal dynamics behind that, did Carrera know that Vivian ran it independently of me? I believe, Martin said, that Carrera understood he was in a relationship with a well-administered financial entity and that he did not ask questions about its internal governance, because in his experience, the less you know about how money is managed, the less you can be compelled to testify about. Roman made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Smart man. Very. The federal situation, Roman said. The DOJ case. Martin said nothing. I know there's been communication, Roman said. Carver found traces in the document requests. Whoever your cutout is, they left a thread. He looked at Martin directly for the first time in the conversation, and the look was steady and assessing and entirely without the theatrical quality that men in Roman's position sometimes deployed when they wanted to be frightening. This was the look of a man who simply needed information and had the means to insist on receiving it. How far along are they? I'm not going to answer that, Martin said. You're in this car. I know I'm in this car. And I'm telling you that there are lines I won't cross in this conversation, and the federal timeline is one of them. Not because of what you'll do to me, because of what Vivian would do to me. He said it without irony and meant it without irony, and he saw Roman register that. The specific information that Martin Ellison, sitting in Roman Viscari's car, was more afraid of Vivian Ashford than of him. The silence that followed had a particular quality. Then Roman said, almost quietly, what does she want? She wants what the documents say she owns. She wants the whole thing. She wants the legal entities, the legitimate businesses, the investment structures, the properties held by the trust. In exchange for, and this is what I'm authorized to tell you, in exchange for her non-participation in the federal process as a witness. Roman looked at him. She has documentation, Martin said, 15 years of it, financial records, communication logs, structural documentation that establishes the operational relationship between the legitimate assets and the criminal enterprise. She could provide that documentation voluntarily as a cooperating witness, and the case it would build. He stopped. You need to understand the scope of what she has. Tell me the scope, Roman said. His voice was very flat. Everything, Martin said. She documented everything, not as insurance. She didn't build it as a threat. She built it because she is a person who documents things, who keeps records, who maintains systems. But the result is that she has a 15-year archive of your organization's financial architecture that is more complete than what the DOJ has spent 4 years trying to assemble. He paused. She is not planning to use it. She wants a clean legal transfer and a separation, and then she is done. But she needs you to understand what not accepting that offer means. Roman sat very still. The car was still not moving. Outside, New York continued at its indifferent pace. Get out, Roman said. Martin reached for the door handle. Tell her. Roman stopped, started again. Tell her I'll have Carver reach out. Martin got out of the car. He stood on the sidewalk and the car pulled away into the morning traffic, and he stood there for a moment with his hands in his coat pockets and breathed the cold February air and thought about the conversation with the specific analytical detachment of a man who processes difficult information by examining it rather than feeling it. He thought about Roman's face when he had said she married me with a plan. He thought about what was underneath that expression, the cold thing on the other side of the rage, and he identified it finally, precisely. It was not grief, and it was not humiliation. It was the expression of a man who has decided that the terms being offered are not the terms he intends to accept, and who is already thinking about what he has that the other side does not know about. Martin pulled out his phone and called Vivian. She answered immediately. He's going to have Carver call you, Martin said. He heard the offer. And I think you need to be very careful. There's something. He searched for the precise word. There's something he's holding, something he thinks changes the position. He was too calm at the end. A pause. The Alderman property, she said. Martin stopped walking. What about it? I've been thinking about it since last night. The Alderman property in Chicago. It's in the Whitmore Group, which is in the trust. But the deed transfer from 2018, when we moved it into Whitmore, Roman signed as the transferring party, not as an authorized agent. If a court had decided that the transfer was made under a false representation of ownership, it could void the transfer, Martin said. He was already moving again, faster. It could void the transfer and revert the property to Roman's personal estate, outside the trust, which means any federal lien on his personal assets would attach to it before the trust could assert a claim. If Roman files for that reversal, it's a long shot. It's a genuine legal long shot, and any competent judge would see through it. But Martin's voice had the quality of someone performing their own calculation in real time. But it would tie up the Whitmore structure in litigation for 18 months, maybe longer. And while it's tied up, the Carrera relationship deteriorates, Vivian said. Without the clean Whitmore documentation, the operational continuity argument weakens. Carrera gets nervous and realigns with Roman. And without Carrera, the legitimate business transition loses its primary international infrastructure. Her voice was steady. Absolutely steady. He had worked with her for 9 years and he still found it remarkable. The capacity she had to stand inside a problem, fully inside it, without being moved by it. How long before the alderman reversal filing would become visible to us? If he files today, we see it by tomorrow morning. And we have how long to respond before it affects the Carrera timeline? 72 hours, maybe 90. She was quiet. He walked a full block in silence, hearing nothing on her end except the same ambient quality as before. A person in a room, very still, thinking. Then she said, "Martin, the Vic Parish question." He stopped again. This was the one neither of them had said out loud yet, the one that had been sitting in the edge of his awareness since the conversation in the car. Yes. Someone told Roman about Carrera. Yes. Someone who understood the legal architecture well enough to know what Carrera meant to our transition. Not Carver. Carver has always read the trust documents as Roman's instruments. Carver wouldn't have known to flag Carrera specifically. He would have seen the relationship but not its structural significance to us. He said it slowly, feeling it as he said it. Someone who understood both sides, both the operational side and the legal structure. Someone who has worked with both of us, Vivian said. The name arrived in Martin's mind at the same moment she said it. Elena Caruso, Vivian said. Martin stood on a midtown sidewalk in February and felt the cold go through his coat in a way it hadn't a moment before. She's been with you for 7 years. I trusted her with the Whitmore filing in 2020. She was the notary on 2 of the Delaware instruments. A pause. She is also married to Roman's legal counsel. She has access to Carver's files. She has access to everything Carver knows, and everything I've trusted her with. And if she's been communicating both directions, Vivian stopped. Martin understood what she was not saying. If Elena Caruso had been feeding information both ways, from Vivian's side to Carver's, and from Carver's side back to Vivian, then the picture of what Roman knew was completely different from what Martin had been operating on. It meant Roman had not spent the last 2 days working from blindness. It meant Roman had been receiving information. It meant the calm in the car, the too-controlled face, the absence of panic in a man who had every reason to panic. It meant Roman knew something specific, something that Martin and Vivian had said or done or filed that they believed was invisible. The Delaware filing, Martin said. The accelerated discovery request. If Elena saw that, she saw it this morning. I sent her the confirmation document as a routine update. Standard practice. Vivian's voice had something in it now, something compressed and flat, that he recognized as the sound of someone in the specific moment of understanding that they have made an error. Not panic, not grief, just the cold, clear recognition of it. She's been getting the routine updates for 3 years, which means Roman knows the federal filing is accelerated. Yes. Which means he knows he has less than 24 hours before the U.S. Attorney's Office has the discovery request. Yes. Vivian. He said her name with a weight in it. If Roman knows the federal clock is running, and he knows the Carrera relationship is the structural weakness, and he knows about the alderman reversal possibility, he's not going to negotiate. He's going to move. Tonight, or tomorrow at the latest, he's going to do something that doesn't involve Carver and doesn't involve paper. She was quiet for 3 seconds, 5 seconds. He counted. I know, she said. The apartment. I'm not at the apartment. Where are you? She told him. He closed his eyes briefly, recalibrated, opened them. Okay, he said. Okay. Curtis? With me. The other three. In position. He breathed. The Elena situation. How do you want to handle it? A pause that lasted long enough to contain everything. The 7 years, the trust, the documents she had shared, the dinners and the conversations, and the particular closeness of two women in a world full of men who didn't look at them carefully enough. He heard all of it in the pause. Leave it, Vivian said. Don't contact her. Don't move differently. If Roman thinks we don't know, he'll keep using her as a channel, which means we see what he's deciding. And if he moves before we can respond, then we respond to what he does, not what we anticipated. She paused. Martin, the Carrera call. I need to make it directly. That's Vivian. If you call Carrera directly, you remove all the buffer. It becomes personal. Carrera can use the direct communication to argue later that the trust relationship was actually an individual. I know the risk, she said, but if Roman has already called him personally, and if Carrera is sitting with two competing personal offers, the decision he makes in the next 24 hours will be based on who he trusts as a person, not which legal structure is more cleanly documented. A pause. He knew me before he knew Roman. That was true before tonight, and it's still true. Martin walked another half block and turned the corner and found a coffee shop and went inside because he needed to be somewhere that wasn't a sidewalk. He sat at the counter and a woman put a cup in front of him without being asked, and he wrapped both hands around it and thought about everything that had just moved. Elena Caruso, 7 years. The notary signature on the Delaware instruments. The routine updates. The confirmation document sent at 7 this morning. He thought about Roman in the car. The flat, cold look at the end. The specific quality of someone who has an ace they haven't played. Vivian, he said, I'm here. There's something else. He said it slowly because he was still working it out as he spoke, the way he sometimes did with financial structures, finding the thread by following it out loud. If Elena has been feeding both ways, if Roman has access to our internal communications, then Roman knows about the federal cutout. He knows there's been communication with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Yes. Which means he's not just looking at a civil asset dispute. He's looking at a potential RICO exposure that is now accelerating faster than he thought it was. He set the coffee cup down. And if he's looking at that, he's not thinking about the Alderman property, Vivian said. Her voice had changed, not in tone, but in the particular quality of its stillness, the way it went very quiet when she was arriving at something. He's thinking about the one thing that could stop a federal case before it reaches an indictment. Martin understood it the moment she did. The documents, he said, the 15-year archive. If Roman can get to the documents before they're transferred to the U.S. attorney, there's no case without the documents, Vivian said. The DOJ has 4 years of circumstantial material. What I have is the operational architecture. Without it, they have suspicion. With it, they have certainty. Where are the documents? 3 locations, she said. Cloud-backed, which is secure. But there are physical originals, the signed instruments, the notarized documents, the ones that carry the actual legal weight. I have them in... She stopped. He waited. Martin, she said, and for the first time in the 9 years he had worked with her, her voice had something in it that he could not immediately identify, that he had to sit with for a moment before he recognized it as the sound of a person who has just understood that the ground has shifted under them in a way they did not plan for. Elena was in my apartment on Saturday, 2 days before the party. He sat very still. She came for coffee, Vivian said. We talked for 2 hours. And Another pause, and this one had a different weight. Not the analytical pause, not the thinking pause, but the pause of a person looking at their own error with the full, unsparing recognition that it was theirs. I had the physical documents on the desk. I had been reviewing them in preparation. I put them away when she arrived, but she was there for 2 hours and I left the room twice. Did she know what she was looking at? Elena Caruso has been the notary on legal instruments for 17 years, Vivian said. She knows exactly what she was looking at. Martin stood up from the counter. The coffee sat untouched. If she told Roman where the physical documents are, he knows where my apartment is, Vivian said. Carver has always known. Vivian, you need to... I know. The documents need to be moved. Now. Tonight. Before... I know, she said, and the voice was back to what it always was. Controlled, certain, the specific quality of someone who does not waste time on the past when the present is still in motion. Curtis, we're going now. He heard movement. He heard her say something to someone in the room that he couldn't make out. He heard a door. Then she said, Martin, one more thing. What? The signed Kessler Holdings Amendment from 2021, the one that transferred operational management to the trust. Roman signed it, and the notary on it. The name arrived before she finished the sentence. Elena Caruso, he said. If Elena is willing to testify that the signing was made under duress or misrepresentation, Vivian said, the Kessler transfer is voidable, which means the trust loses the Kessler infrastructure entirely, and without Kessler, the Whitmore collateral chain breaks, and without Whitmore, the whole structure comes apart, Martin said. Elena Caruso can undo the entire thing from the inside. The silence that followed was the longest one of the conversation. How good is she? Vivian said. Not asking about Elena, asking about herself, asking whether the woman who had built the structure could hold it together now that one of the foundational people inside it had become a weapon aimed at its center. Martin thought about Roman in the car, the cold, controlled face, the ace unplayed. He's going to use her, Martin said, not just as a source. He's going to put Elena on the stand in the civil proceeding and have her testify that the Kessler signing was coerced. And Carver will file the motion this week before the federal discovery lands, because once the federal process starts, the civil proceedings get complicated. Which means I have 48 hours, Martin said, maybe less, to move the documents, secure the Carrera relationship, and find a way to neutralize Elena's testimony before Carver puts her in a position where she has no choice but to give it. Another pause. He heard the car start through the phone. Martin, Vivian said, yes. I need you to find out how long Elena has been doing this. He understood what she was asking. Not the timeline of the information transfer. That was a logistical question. She was asking something else. Whether the woman she had trusted for 7 years had been placed in her life with a purpose, or whether she had been turned somewhere along the way, and what the difference was, and what it meant. I'll find out, he said. Tonight. Tonight, he confirmed. The call ended. He stood in the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning in February with his phone in his hand and the untouched cup steaming on the counter and thought about the architecture, the 15 years of it, the legal precision of it, the extraordinary patience and discipline of it, and about the single Saturday morning 2 days before a party where a woman had come for coffee and been left alone in a room twice, and about how the most carefully constructed thing in the world could still come apart at the point of trust, because trust was the one thing you could not document or legally protect or hold in a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Trust was the thing that lived between people. And somewhere between Vivian and Elena Caruso, in the space of 7 years and 2 hours on a Saturday morning, it had been broken in a way that was about to cost everything they had built. Unless Vivian moved faster than Roman expected her to move. Unless she did the one thing she had spent 15 years specifically choosing not to do, the thing that Roman did reflexively, that the entire world of men she had moved through did reflexively, and decided that the time for patience was over, and that what came next would not be careful, and would not be legal, and would not look anything like the woman they believed they had always. Curtis drove fast without looking like he was driving fast, which was the specific skill that had kept him employed for 9 years. Vivian was in the back seat with her phone in one hand and the mental map of the next 6 hours running in her head with the particular clarity that arrived, always, when the situation had compressed past a certain point, when the variables had reduced themselves, through crisis, to the ones that actually mattered. She had found, over the years, that genuine emergency had a focusing quality that no amount of planning could replicate. It stripped away everything that was preparation and left only what was real. What was real right now, the documents in the Upper East Side apartment. 3 boxes of physical originals, signed instruments, notarized transfers, the foundational legal paper of everything the Ashford Trust held. She had kept them there because the apartment was secure, because no one outside of Martin and Elena knew its precise address, and because she had built the entire 15-year architecture on the belief that control of information was the same as control of outcome. Elena Caruso had been in that apartment on Saturday. Vivian did not spend time on the feeling this produced. She noted it, the way you note a physical injury, the specific location and severity of it, and she set it aside because the feeling was not useful and the documents were. She called the apartment's building security directly, bypassing the management company, and spoke to the overnight supervisor, a man named Garrett, who had been on the desk for 6 years and who knew her as the quiet woman in 14C who tipped well at Christmas and never had visitors. "Has anyone asked about my unit in the last 24 hours?" she said. A pause. "Ms. Ashford, there was yesterday afternoon, around 4. A man came in saying he was from a property management company, said he needed to verify the unit's HVAC access for a building-wide inspection. Did he go up? I called the management office to verify. They said they didn't have any inspection scheduled. I turned him away. Thank you, Garrett. I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to go to the stairwell on 14 and tell me if the door to that stairwell has been accessed in the last 12 hours. She heard him moving, the sound of a door, a pause. Ms. Ashford, the door on 14, it looks like the magnetic seal has been overridden. It's not latching properly. She said, don't go onto the floor. Call NYPD non-emergency and tell them there may have been an unauthorized entry. Do it now, while I'm on the phone. She heard him making the call. She looked out the window. They were on the FDR, the East River black and flat beside them, the city's lights fractured across the water. 20 minutes from the apartment. Maybe 15 if Curtis pushed it. She called Martin. The apartment was accessed, she said when he picked up. Probably yesterday afternoon. They tried the HVAC story. Building security turned them away. But the stairwell seal on 14 has been compromised. They went in through the stairwell. Or they were in position to go in and were waiting for the right moment. She breathed. The documents, Martin. If they've been in that apartment, the cloud backup is intact. I verified it 40 minutes ago. The digital archive is untouched. The physical originals are what Carver needs for the civil proceeding. Digital copies are admissible, but a competent defense attorney will challenge them. The physical notarized instruments are what closes the argument. How long to get there? 15 minutes. Vivian. His voice was careful. If they access the apartment, they may still be watching it. I know. You shouldn't go in. The documents are in a fireproof cabinet behind the secondary wall panel in the bedroom closet, she said. There are 2 people in this world who know that location, you and Elena. Silence. If Elena told them, she said, then they know exactly what they're looking for and where it is, and the question is whether they've already taken it or whether they're waiting for me to confirm they have the right material before they remove it. She paused. Roman doesn't destroy documents. He acquires them. He would want to have them, to use them, to trade them, to hold them over the federal process. Which means if they found the cabinet, the documents are either already gone or they're waiting. Either way, you don't walk into that apartment. No, she agreed. I don't. She looked at Curtis in the rearview mirror. I need you to think. Who do we have who can go and clean? Someone Roman's people won't recognize, who can get to that closet and get out with the cabinet contents in under 4 minutes. The silence on Martin's end was the working silence, not the uncertain one. She heard him thinking. Park, he said. She's in the city. She's done physical retrieval before, when we pulled the Kessler originals from the Carver satellite office in 2021. Call her now. I want her at the building's service entrance in 10 minutes. She'll need the panel code, 74417. The cabinet key is taped to the inside of the bathroom mirror frame left side. She said it without hesitation, which was the result of having maintained the habit, through all her years of building careful things, of knowing exactly where everything was. On it, Martin said. What are you going to do? She looked out the window at the city. I'm going to call Elena. Another silence. Longer. Vivian, I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because calling Elena right now, when we don't know the full scope of what she's shared, could... It tells her we know, Vivian said, which means it tells Roman we know, through whatever channel she uses, which means Roman adjusts. She paused. Which means he moves. And a man who moves in a hurry makes a different kind of mistake than a man who thinks he's invisible. Martin was quiet for a moment. You're not calling to confront her. I'm calling to make her call him. He understood then. She heard it in his breath, the small sound of someone arriving at a conclusion they find both correct and uncomfortable. You want him to come to you. I want him to stop moving in the dark, she said. I want this finished, tonight. She ended the call and held the phone and looked at the river. She thought about Elena, about the 7 years, the coffee on Saturday, the 2 hours of conversation that had covered 3 different topics and had felt entirely genuinely normal, the way years of genuine closeness felt normal, the specific warmth and ease of it. She thought about whether that warmth had been real or performed, and then she decided the question was not useful and probably had no clean answer, and that the more relevant question was what Elena had and hadn't shared, and why, and when it had started. She dialed. Elena picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was the voice of someone who was awake and waiting for the call, not the voice of someone woken from sleep. "Vivian," she said. "Elena." Vivian kept her voice exactly what it always was, warm, direct, the voice of a friend calling with something on her mind. "I need to tell you something." A pause. "All right." "Roman has sent someone to the apartment. They were in the building yesterday. The stairwell seal on my floor has been compromised." She let it sit for 2 seconds. "I think someone told him about the documents." The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. In 4 seconds, Elena Caruso's voice, when it came, had the quality of someone performing a response they had prepared. Vivian, that's terrible. Are you—" "I'm not there," Vivian said. "I'm safe." "But the documents—" "Elena, if Roman gets those originals before the federal filing completes, we lose the Kessler structure. You know what that means." "Yes." The word was careful, too careful. "I need to move them tonight. I need to know if you can come. I need someone I trust to help me with the physical transfer. Martin is occupied with the Carrera call." She paused. "Can you come?" 4 seconds. 5. "Where are you?" Elena said. "I'll send you the address," Vivian said. "An hour. Can you make an hour?" "Yes," Elena said. "I'll be there." Vivian ended the call. She did not feel the thing she had expected to feel, which was grief or anger or the specific ache of a betrayal confirmed. She felt, instead, a kind of clarifying coldness, the temperature that arrived when a situation was reduced to its final essential shape, and the shape was clear, and what came next was equally clear. She said to Curtis, "Change of destination, the Meridian Coastal Office on West 52nd. Curtis didn't ask questions. He changed lanes. She sent the West 52nd address to Elena with a text that said street entrance, ask for the night desk. Then she sent a second text to a number saved under a sequence of digits that was not a name, that said, "He'll move in the next 90 minutes. Be ready." Then she put the phone in her coat pocket and sat with her hands in her lap, and the city moving past the windows, and she thought about Roman, about where he was right now, what he was doing when his phone buzzed with Elena's call. She thought about his face in the car this morning as Martin had described it to her afterward. The controlled face, the cold thing underneath the control. She thought about a man who had spent 23 years solving problems with his body and other people's bodies, and who was now, for the first time in those 23 years, in a situation where that particular solution was unavailable to him because the woman on the other side of the problem had made herself legally untouchable. She thought about the penthouse, the Manhattan penthouse, their city residence, the one that had been in both their names since 2012, the one that was not in the trust structure because Roman had insisted early in the marriage on keeping one property free of what he called the administrative arrangements. She had agreed because the penthouse was not operationally significant, and because she had understood even then that Roman needed to feel he had something that was simply his. She had given him that. It was the one concession in the entire architecture, the one space she had left outside the structure. It was also the place he went when he needed to think. She knew this the way she knew everything about him. From 15 years of paying attention to a man who believed he was unobserved even when he was not. She was counting on him being there tonight. The Meridian Coastal Office was a legitimate commercial space, a real financial services office staffed by real employees who did real work and who happened to also serve as the administrative infrastructure for the trust's operational relationships. The night desk was manned by a man named Reyes, who worked late because Vivian paid him well, and because he had the specific nocturnal disposition of someone who did their best thinking after 10 p.m. Vivian arrived at 9:47. The office had the particular quiet of a professional space after hours. The hum of servers, the ambient light of monitors in sleep mode, the smell of recirculated air and old coffee. She went to the conference room that Martin used when he was in the office, and she sat at the table and she waited. At 10:19, her phone buzzed. It was the number saved as a digit sequence. The text said, "He left the penthouse 12 minutes ago. 2 cars. Heading east." Heading east meant the Upper East Side. The apartment. She texted back, "How many?" 4 in the first car. Roman and 1 other in the second. She looked at the text. Roman in the second car, behind the first, which meant the first car was the advance, the group going into the building, and Roman was staying outside until the situation was controlled, which was what he always did in operational contexts. Not out of cowardice, she had never accused him of that, but out of the structural logic of a man who understood that his value was not in his body, but in his decision-making, and that you didn't put decision-making capacity inside a room until the room was secured. She texted back, "Don't let him leave the block. Stay on him." She called Martin. "Park," she said when he answered. "She's out," he said. "She has the documents. She's 6 blocks away." Vivian exhaled. One breath, controlled, the specific relief of a thing secured. "Get them to the Trust's legal counsel. Tonight. The originals need to be in an attorney's physical custody before midnight." "Understood." The Carrera call. "Did you reach him?" "He called me," Martin said, and his voice had something in it that she hadn't heard in the previous 48 hours. Something lighter, though still careful. 10 minutes ago. He'd been trying to decide something, he said. He made his decision. And? He said, and I'm quoting, that he has always found Roman Vescari to be a man who generates problems and then looks for someone else to hold them. He said he has not found the trust to operate in that manner. A pause. "He's staying with us, Vivian." She sat with that for a moment, the Carrera relationship intact. The documents secured and en route to legal custody. The Alina channel active, feeding Roman's people toward an empty apartment where there was nothing to find. She looked at the conference room table and at her hands flat on its surface and thought about the sequence of the night and where it was converging. "Martin," she said, "I'm going to the penthouse." Dead silence. "Vivian." "He's at the apartment. He'll be there for 20 minutes before he realizes there's nothing to find. Then he'll go back to the penthouse because there is nowhere else for him to go." She paused. "I want to be there when he arrives." "That is—" Martin stopped. Started again with the particular carefulness of a man who knows that what he thinks doesn't determine what she does, but who is going to say it anyway. "That is the most dangerous thing you could do tonight." "It's the most necessary thing," she said. "The legal structure is intact. The documents are secured. The Carrera relationship is confirmed. The federal filing is processing." She paused. "But none of that ends this, Martin. Legally, strategically, on paper, I win. But Roman doesn't stop because paper says he should. Roman stops when he looks at the situation and understands in his gut, in the way that he understands things, not legally, not on paper, that it's over. And that requires a conversation. You're going to walk into an empty apartment and wait for a man who sent 4 people to take your documents tonight." "He sent 4 people to take paper," she said. "He's not going to touch me." "You don't know." "I know Roman," she said. "I have known Roman for 15 years with the kind of attention that nobody in his life has ever paid to him, and I am telling you that the one thing he will not do is hurt me physically. Not because he's a good person, because he understands that if he touches me, every legal protection he still has disappears instantly, and the federal case becomes something entirely different." She stood up from the table. "I know what I'm doing." A long pause. "Curtis stays outside. Curtis stays outside. And you call me the moment, Martin. The moment anything, Martin." She said his name quietly, and he stopped. "Go home. I'll call you at midnight." She ended the call and stood in the quiet office, and then she walked out to where Curtis was waiting and told him the penthouse address on Central Park West, and they drove uptown in silence through the late Tuesday night city, which was quieter than it pretended to be. Most of the noise compressed into specific corridors, while the residential streets ran dark and still. The penthouse building had a doorman who knew her as Mrs. Vescari, which was a name she would be formally removing from herself in the coming weeks, but which still, tonight, got her into the elevator without a call upstairs. She rode up to the 41st floor and let herself in with the key she had carried for 12 years and stepped into the apartment. It was dark. It was also, she noted, not empty. She turned on the lamp by the entrance and saw, on the long couch facing the floor-to-ceiling windows, Celeste Vaughn. Celeste was sitting very still in the dark with her coat still on and her hands in her lap, and the look on her face when the lamp came on was the look of someone who had been sitting in the dark for a while and had not quite decided yet whether they were going to be ashamed of it. She was in the lamplight younger looking than she had been at the party, the performance of the party stripped away, the careful brightness gone. Just a young woman in a coat sitting in someone else's apartment in the dark. "He told me to wait here," Celeste said. Her voice was flat. Not hostile, just flat. The voice of someone who has had a long day and is no longer performing for anyone. Vivian looked at her for a moment. She took off her coat. She hung it on the hook by the door. The same hook she had used for 12 years, muscle memory operating independent of circumstance. And she sat down in the armchair across from the couch and looked at Celeste directly. "How long have you been here?" Vivian said. "Since 8. He called you. He said he needed me out of sight tonight, that there were things happening and he didn't want me involved." She paused. "Which is what he says when he's doing something he doesn't want witnessed." Vivian said nothing. Celeste looked at her with the particular assessment of a young woman who is in a room with a person she has been used as a weapon against, and who is trying to determine the temperature of the situation. "You don't seem scared," she said. "I'm not." "You should probably be scared. He's—" She stopped. "He's what?" Celeste looked at her hands. "He's not. The way he was tonight, on the phone. There's a version of him that I haven't—" She stopped again. She seemed to be doing what people did when they were trying to find honest language for something they had been pretending didn't exist. "I've seen him angry before, but tonight it was different. Tonight it was the kind of quiet that's—" She didn't finish. "I know that quiet," Vivian said. "Then why are you here?" "Because this ends tonight," Vivian said, "one way or another." Celeste looked up at her. In the lamplight, with the city's glow coming through the 41st floor windows behind her, she looked like someone in the middle of reconsidering the choices that had brought her to a specific couch, in a specific dark apartment, and finding the reconsidering overdue. "He's not coming back for me, is he?" Celeste said. Not quite a question. Vivian held her gaze. "I think you know the answer to that." Celeste looked away, looked at the windows. The city was enormous and indifferent out there, doing its relentless thing. He made it sound like, after the party, like it was the beginning of something. "It was the end of something," Vivian said, which looked like a beginning from where he was standing. A silence. Long enough that the apartment's ambient hum became audible. The ventilation, the city below, the intimate white noise of a place that had been lived in. "You should leave," Vivian said, not harshly. "Before he gets back. Whatever you take with you from tonight, you don't need to be here for the rest of it." Celeste looked at her for a moment longer. Then she stood up and smoothed her coat and picked up her bag and walked to the door, and she paused with her hand on the frame exactly the way Martin had paused the previous night at the door of the Upper East Side apartment, and she said, without turning around, "Did you know? At the party. Did you already know everything?" "Yes," Vivian said. Celeste nodded, not surprised, just nodding at a thing confirmed. She walked out. The door closed. Vivian sat alone in the penthouse and the city blazed outside the windows 41 floors below. And she waited. Roman came through the door at 11:48. She heard the elevator before she heard the door. The mechanical sound of it arriving, the pause, the doors. Then the key, and the door, and Roman stepping into the entrance hall and stopping when he saw the lamp on. He stood in the entrance hall in his coat and looked at her across the length of the apartment, and his face went through several things in rapid succession: surprise, assessment, and then a settling, a compression, as the calculation completed, and he understood that her being here was not an accident and was not a mistake. He came in. He didn't take his coat off. He sat down on the couch where Celeste had been sitting and looked at her, and the look was the one from the car, cold and controlled and underneath the control, the thing she had been married to for 15 years, the thing that was not quite Roman himself, but was the version of him that the world had made and that he had chosen to become. "The apartment was clean," he said. "Yes." "The documents." "In legal custody as of an hour ago." He absorbed this. His jaw moved slightly. Elena. Used her, Vivian said. Not blamed her. She made her choices. So did I when I trusted her. She paused. It doesn't change what I have. Roman put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor and then back up at her. You're going to tell me it's over. I'm going to tell you what I'm offering, once. And then whatever you decide, the decision is yours, and I'll act accordingly. She kept her voice level. Not cold, not warm, just the voice of someone who has prepared for this conversation for 15 years and is not going to waste it on emotion. The legal transfer of all entities held by the Ashford Trust proceeds without contest. You remove your name as secondary authorized user from the Cayman accounts within 10 days. The Whitmore and Kessler structures formalize under the Trust's sole management. In exchange, and this is the only version of this exchange that exists, I do not participate in the federal process as a cooperating witness. The DOJ proceeds with what they have, which is substantial, but it's not the full archive. The difference between substantial and the full archive is the difference between an investigation that might produce an indictment and a case that will. Roman said nothing. I'm not destroying you, she said. I'm removing myself. There is a difference, and I need you to understand that I understand the difference and am choosing it deliberately. Not because I'm merciful, but because I don't want your blood. I want what I built. He looked at her for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Outside the windows, 41 floors below, the city moved in its permanent, indifferent way. 15 years, he said. Yes. You spent 15 years building this. I spent 15 years building the organization, she said. The insurance came later, after I understood what I had married into and what it would cost me and what I would need to have when the cost finally came due. When did you know? She considered the question. Year 3, she said. I knew in year 3 that it would end this way. He looked at her. Something crossed his face that she hadn't expected and couldn't name. Not anger, not grief, not the calculated cold. Something older and more unguarded. The expression of a man confronting a fact about himself that he has been able to avoid confronting until now. You could have left, he said. Year 3. You could have just left. With what? She said. With nothing. Leaving year 3 Vivian with nothing was leaving her to nothing, so I stayed and I built. She held his gaze. That's what you do. When you have nothing, you build. He sat with that. The silence stretched long enough that the city outside seemed to get louder, the ambient roar of millions of lives, indifferent to the 2 people on the 41st floor. Then Roman reached into his coat pocket and removed his phone and set it on the coffee table between them, face up. Call Carver, he said. Tell him to be in the office at 8 a.m. Vivian looked at the phone. She looked at Roman's face. He was looking at the window, at the city, at the dark. And his face had the expression of a man who has put something down that he has been carrying for a long time, and is discovering that what he feels is not relief and not defeat, but something that has no clean name, something that lives in the specific space between what you wanted to be and what you became, and the distance between those 2 things that you can never quite close. She reached for her own phone to call Martin. That was when the building's fire alarm went off. The sound was enormous and immediate, the industrial shriek of it filling the apartment without warning, the strobes in the entrance hall flaring white, the sudden chaos of a sound designed to produce movement and producing it, her body on its feet before the rational mind had caught up. Roman standing too, both of them oriented toward the door by the animal logic of alarm. Then she saw it. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the reflection in the glass, a movement on the terrace, something that had not been there a moment before. The shape of a person coming over the terrace railing from the building's exterior service structure. And she understood in the same instant that the alarm was not a fire alarm, and that the terrace figure was not alone, and that Roman had not, when he'd said call Carver, concluded anything at all. And that the cold, controlled face and the phone on the table had been the last move in a game she had believed was already over, designed for the single moment when her attention went to the phone and away from the room. She turned to face Roman. And Roman was already on his feet, and his face was not the calculated cold anymore. It was something raw and desperate and frightened in a way she had never seen on him in 15 years. And he said, Vivian, that's not... and his voice had something in it that sounded impossibly like genuine alarm, and she understood in that fraction of a second that she could not tell whether the terrace figure was his or not, whether the alarm was his play or someone else's entirely, whether the man standing across the coffee table from her had just made his move or was as surprised as she was, and she had approximately 3 seconds to decide which version of this was true before the terrace door opened and the night came. The terrace door opened and the night came in cold and absolute. The man who stepped through it was not one of Roman's people. Vivian understood this in the first half second, understood it from the way Roman's body moved, the involuntary step backward that was not the controlled repositioning of a man executing a plan, but the raw physical recoil of someone confronting a surprise. She had watched Roman Vescari for 15 years in rooms where the stakes were high enough to kill, and she knew the difference between his performance of surprise and the real thing, and what was on his face right now was the real thing, unmanaged and unambiguous. The man on the terrace was broad across the shoulders and wore dark clothing and a wool cap pulled low, and he moved into the apartment with the particular unhurried efficiency of someone who had entered rooms this way before. He was followed by a second man, slightly shorter, who pulled the terrace door closed behind him with a care that was more unnerving than haste would have been. The first man looked at Roman, not at Vivian, at Roman. "Mr. Vescari," he said. His voice was flat, accented faintly with something Eastern European that Vivian couldn't pinpoint precisely. "Mr. Falcone sends his regards." The fire alarm was still screaming. The strobes in the entrance hall pulsed white, 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 throwing the room into a rhythm of light and shadow that made everything look like it was happening in fragments, in cuts, the way a thing looks when you're too close to it to see it whole. Roman's face had gone through 3 things in 2 seconds and was settling on the 4th, which was the particular gray of a man who has made a series of calculations in rapid succession and arrived at a result he does not like. "Dante sent you," he said. "Dante sent you here." "Mr. Falcone has concerns about the bridge loan," the first man said. He felt that the timeline for resolution was optimistic. "The loan isn't due. The loan accelerated," the man said. "This afternoon. The collateral holder filed the acceleration notice. Mr. Falcone is aware." He paused. "Mr. Falcone is aware of a number of things he was not aware of 48 hours ago." Vivian stood very still. The alarm shrieked. She was calculating. The room's dimensions, the distance to the entrance hall, the distance to her phone on the coffee table, the position of the second man who had stopped near the kitchen island and was watching her with the steady attention of someone whose job in this situation was to watch her. She was not going to reach the phone. She was not going to reach the entrance hall. The second man's position made both impossible. What she had was the room and the 2 men in it, and Roman, who was 3 feet to her left and whose breathing she could hear over the alarm. Fast, effortful, the breathing of a man whose body was running a threat response that his brain was trying to override. She had also spent 15 years in rooms with men like this, and she had learned, early and at some cost, that the most dangerous thing you could do in the presence of men like this was to appear to be a variable they hadn't accounted for. Women in these rooms were either furniture or threat. Furniture was ignored. Threat was addressed. She chose furniture. She sat back down in the armchair. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at neither man and at Roman only obliquely, the way furniture looked at nothing in particular. And she felt the second man's attention slide off her after a moment with the specific quality of attention that has concluded its assessment. "The 8.3 million, Roman said. His voice had recovered some of its register. Not fully, but enough to be functional. "I need 10 days to restructure the collateral." "Mr. Falcone has been told that the collateral is held by a trust not under your control," the first man said. "He does not believe 10 days resolves that problem. The trust situation is being—" "Mr. Falcone has also been told," the man continued, without inflection, "that you have made representations to several partners over the past 48 hours about the stability of your financial position that Mr. Falcone believes were not fully accurate." The alarm stopped. The silence that followed was enormous. The sudden, ringing absence of sound after sustained noise, which was almost louder than the noise itself. In the silence, the room reassembled itself. The strobes stopped. The city outside the windows was visible again, the steady glow of it, the million quiet lives. In the silence, Vivian made a decision. She stood up. Both men looked at her. The second man shifted his weight. She held up one hand, not a surrender gesture, not theatrical, just the hand of someone who is about to say something and wants the room to understand that what they are about to say is worth hearing. "The bridge loan collateral," she said. Her voice was steady and even and carried the particular authority of someone who has spent 15 years being the person in rooms who actually understood the numbers. "The Westchester properties, which are held by the Ashford Trust." She looked at the first man directly. "Tell Mr. Falcone that the trust's administrator will accept a direct renegotiation of the loan terms. 60 days extended to 120. The collateral remains in place. The interest continues to accrue. Mr. Falcone's principal is fully secured throughout the extension." The first man looked at her. His expression was the expression of a man who had come into a room expecting one kind of conversation and found another. "You're the trust," he said. Not a question. "I'm the trust," she said. He looked at Roman. Roman's jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing something complicated that she did not spend time on. The first man looked back at her with the assessing quality of someone who has, in his professional experience, developed the ability to identify very quickly which person in a room is the one whose word is worth something. "I'll relay the offer," he said. "Tell him he has until Friday," Vivian said. "After Friday, the terms change." The first man nodded once. He gestured to the second man. They went back through the terrace door with the same unhurried efficiency with which they had entered, and the terrace door closed, and they were gone. The room was quiet. Roman stood 3 feet to her left and breathed. She sat back down. He sat down too, on the couch, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, and the city outside the windows filled the silence with its permanent ambient voice, the sound of 10 million people going about their lives, and the apartment on the 41st floor held the two of them in the particular exhausted quiet that follows crisis. "Dante Falcone," Roman said finally, "has been nervous since Tuesday morning," she said. "When you couldn't answer his calls with any certainty, he made his own calculations. He was going to—" Roman stopped. "He was going to do what Dante Falcone has always done when someone owes him money and appears to have lost the means to pay it," she said, "which is not your problem anymore. The trust will renegotiate the loan and the trust will secure it and Mr. Falcone will be paid." She paused. "That's what it looks like when the financial architecture actually works. Someone shows up, and the numbers are real, and the collateral is there, and the problem gets solved without anyone ending up in the river." Roman looked at her. The cold, controlled face was gone entirely now, stripped off by the last 10 minutes, by the terrace door opening, and the Eastern European voice, and the specific terror of being in a room with men like that, and finding that the only functional person in it was the woman you had publicly humiliated 5 days ago. What was underneath the controlled face was something older and more worn, the actual face of a 51-year-old man who has spent 23 years building something that has just shown him its foundations. "Call Carver," she said. 8 a.m. Tell him to prepare the transfer documents." Roman looked at his phone on the coffee table. He looked at it for a long moment with the expression of someone looking at a thing that used to mean something and is trying to locate what it means now. Then he picked it up and sent a text and set it back down. "The federal case," he said. "Proceeds with what they have," she said. "I meant what I said. I'm not a cooperating witness. Whatever they've built in 4 years, you'll deal with it with Carver. The archive stays sealed as long as the transfer is clean and complete. And if it's not clean—" She looked at him. "Then it won't stay sealed," she said. "That's the whole sentence, Roman. Clean transfer, sealed archive. Those two things are the same sentence." He nodded. Small, minimal. The nod of a man who has run out of alternate positions and knows it. She stood up. She got her coat from the hook by the door. The same hook, the same muscle memory, for what she understood was the last time. She put it on, and she turned and she looked at the apartment, the long room, the high windows, the city behind the glass, the couch and the coffee table, and the lamp and the 12 years of evenings she had spent in this space. She looked at it the way she had looked at the mansion party the night she had walked out, not with grief, not cataloging what was being left, but with the clear-eyed regard of a person who has finished something and is acknowledging the finishing. Then she looked at Roman. He was sitting on the couch with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he was looking at the floor, and in the lamplight he looked for the first time in 15 years, his age. Not diminished. She would not have said diminished, because that was not the right word, and she had always been precise about words. But present. Actually present in his body and his age and his situation in a way that the performance of power had always prevented. "Roman," she said. He looked up. "The room," she said. "The East Wing suite. I want you to understand something about that room." He waited. "I didn't care about the room," she said. "I want you to know that. The suite, the furniture, the space, the privacy of it. I didn't care about any of that." She paused, finding the precise words for something she had not planned to say, but which felt now like the thing that needed to be said for the conversation to be actually complete. "What I cared about was what it told me. When you gave away that room, you told me that 15 years of what I had done in it, everything I had built, every call I had made, every structure I had designed and maintained and protected, you told me that none of it had ever registered as real to you, that I had been so successful at being invisible that even you couldn't see me." She held his gaze. "That was the night I understood that I had been invisible to myself too, that the performance had become the thing, and I decided that whatever came next, it would be done in my name." Roman looked at her for a long time. His jaw worked. He started to say something and stopped. He looked at the window. He looked back at her. "I saw you," he said. His voice was rough with something she couldn't and didn't need to identify. I told myself it didn't matter, what you did, how it got done. I told myself it was administrative." "I know," she said. "That was the—" He stopped. "I know," she said again, not forgiving him, not indicting him, just confirming that she had always known, had built the entire architecture of the last 15 years on the foundation of that knowing, and that the knowing had cost her something she was not going to name tonight, or perhaps ever, and that it had also made her into exactly what she was standing here as, which was a woman who had won every room she was in and was now choosing which rooms to enter. She walked to the door. "Vivian." His voice was quiet, final sounding, the voice of a man saying a name for the last time in the particular sense in which he has always said it. She turned. "Was any of it—" He stopped, rearranged. "Did you ever—" She looked at him across the length of the apartment. "Yes," she said. "In the beginning, before I understood what the beginning was the beginning of—" She paused. "That's true, Roman. I want you to have that." She walked out. The elevator was immediate. She rode down 41 floors, and the doors opened and she walked through the lobby, and Curtis was at the curb where she had not told him to be, but where she had known, with the certainty of 9 years, that he would be. She got in. He put the car in drive. Neither of them spoke. She looked out the window as New York moved past, and she thought about the next morning, the 8 a.m. call to Carver, the documents that Park had delivered to the Trust's legal counsel, the Falcone renegotiation, the Carrera call that Martin had taken and won, the Delaware filing processing through the night toward the desk of the assistant U.S. attorney who would receive it and not yet understand what it would become. She thought about all of it in the orderly, sequential way she thought about systems, as components in a structure, each piece bearing its share of the weight, the whole thing standing because the design was sound. Then she stopped thinking about it, because it was done, and what was done did not require further thought. It required only the willingness to let it be done and move forward. She thought about something else instead. She thought about the woman she had been at 29, standing in a Manhattan anteroom waiting for a ceremony to begin, wearing a dress that had cost 2 months of her salary at the private wealth firm, understanding even then with the analytical part of her brain that she was making a calculated decision and that calculated decisions carried costs that could not always be fully projected. She thought about what she would tell that woman now if she could, and decided she would not tell her anything because the woman at 29 had made the choices she had made with the information she had, and those choices had produced 15 years of difficulty, and also the woman now in the back of a car at midnight who had just negotiated down 2 men from Dante Falcone's organization and walked away from Roman Viscari with everything she had built. The math was brutal, and it was not nothing. Martin called at 12:40. "The documents are in counsel's custody," he said. "Confirmed and receipted. The Delaware filing. Processing. I've been told the U.S. Attorney's Office will have it on their system by 6 a.m. A pause. Carrera sent a formal confirmation of the relationship transfer at 11:15, in writing, on his letterhead. Good. Vivian. His voice had the quality it had only when he had something to say that he had been deciding whether to say. Briggs, the man Roman sent to find me. He went to the Lexington office tonight. He found it empty. I want you to know that. I know. I had Park do some background on him after the morning. Briggs has worked for Roman for 9 years, but before that he worked for Dante Falcone. She sat with that. Falcone sent his own man to keep track of Roman's man. That's what it looks like. The 2 men on the terrace tonight. I believe Falcone has been running his own surveillance on the situation since the Falcone loan notice went out. He wanted to know what Roman was doing and whether Roman's moves were going to affect his money before Roman had the chance to present a managed version of events. So Falcone knew about the trust, she said. Falcone knew that something was wrong with Roman's financial position. He didn't know the specifics until his people started pulling threads. And then they pulled the thread that led to the Ashford Trust, and they found out what it was. Martin paused. I think Falcone came to the penthouse tonight to find out if the trust was real and who controlled it, and now he knows. And now he knows, she said. Which means you have Dante Falcone's attention. She looked out the window at the city. The city looked back, the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of its own perpetual motion, unbothered by what happened to any particular person within it, which was the thing she had always found clarifying about it. The city did not care about her victory or her cost. It simply continued. You either continued with it or you didn't, and the quality of your continuing was the only thing that was ever actually up to you. Martin, she said, go home, sleep. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I have a meeting with Carver at 8 and a call with the Trust's legal counsel at 10 and a conversation with the Carrera representative at noon. She paused. And after that, I'm going to take the rest of the afternoon and do nothing, which I have not done in approximately 15 years and which I intend to do very well. She heard something in Martin's voice that was as close as he got to a laugh. Good night, Vivian. Good night. She put the phone away. Curtis took the turn that led uptown, and the city arranged itself outside the windows in its familiar geometry. The grid, the light, the permanent organized chaos of a place that had been built by people who believed that structure was the same as survival, which was a belief she had always shared. In the weeks that followed, the Ashford Trust executed the transfer of all contested entities without legal challenge. Roman Vescari signed each document in Carver's office over the course of 2 sessions, and Carver reported to Martin afterward that Roman had signed with the same large, confident, slightly illegible signature he had always used, which Martin relayed to Vivian and which she received without comment. The federal investigation into Roman Vescari produced an indictment 7 months later on charges that drew from 4 years of accumulated evidence and did not require the Ashford Trust's archive, which remained sealed. Roman engaged a defense team, and the proceedings moved at the pace that such proceedings always moved, which was slow and expensive and without the dramatic compression of the way people imagined legal consequence. He was, to Vivian's knowledge, never violent toward her or anyone connected to her. He was also, within 6 months, effectively without resources to be violent with, which was perhaps the more operative constraint. Celeste Vaughn left New York in February. Martin found out through a real estate transaction that she had gone to Miami, which seemed, to Vivian, exactly right for someone who needed warmth and a fresh context and the particular amnesia of a place that did not keep records of who you had been somewhere else. She did not think badly of Celeste. She thought about her infrequently and without heat, the way you thought about weather, a condition that had obtained and then changed. Elena Caruso called once, in March. Vivian answered. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. Elena said she was sorry, which Vivian received without filling the silence after it with anything that would have let Elena off the hook of sitting with what she had done. Elena said she had been afraid of Carver, afraid of what Carver knew about her husband's involvement in certain arrangements, afraid that if Roman's position became untenable, her husband's practice went with it, and that fear had made her, she used the word susceptible, which Vivian thought was an honest and also slightly self-serving word for what had happened. Elena said she had not told Roman about the physical document's location. She had told Carver about the Delaware filing's acceleration, and Carver had drawn his own conclusions about what it meant for the physical evidence. Vivian listened. At the end, she said, "I believe you about the documents." A pause. "I don't know yet what I believe about the rest of it." Another pause. "I won't use what you told me against you. That's not what this was for." Elena was quiet for a moment. "What was it for?" she said. Not combatively, genuinely. "For what I built," Vivian said. "Just that. I wanted what I built." She ended the call and sat for a long time in the office that was now, formally and exclusively and without qualification, hers. The office was in Midtown, in a building that did not announce itself, in a suite that had been quietly occupied by the Ashford Trust's administrative operations for 6 years without anyone in Roman's world having known it existed. She had redecorated it in January, which meant she had replaced 2 chairs and added a plant, because she had never been a person who needed her environment to reflect her, but she had found, in the months after the night on the 41st floor, that she wanted the plant, something living and requiring water and generating, in the small way that plants did, oxygen. Martin had found this observation funnier than she thought it deserved. The Ashford Investment Group, which was what the Trust's legitimate business operations became, publicly and formally, in April of that year, employed 240 people across its various entities by the end of its first year of fully independent operation. By the end of the second year, the number was closer to 800, because the Carrera relationship had opened access to international logistics infrastructure that the investment group had been able to develop into a legitimate supply chain management division. And supply chain management was a field that did not care who you had been, only whether your systems actually worked, and Vivian's systems worked with the precision of things that had been built over 15 years and tested against every possible pressure. She was interviewed once by a financial publication that had heard about the investment group's growth and wanted to understand its origins. She gave the interview because she had decided that visibility was now the correct position, that the time for invisibility was over, and that what she had built was solid enough to be seen. The journalist, a young woman with a good eye for the specific quality of a person who has survived something, asked her, "What's the most important thing you've learned about building something that lasts?" Vivian thought about it. She thought about the structures, the legal entities, the shell corporations, the documented chains of ownership that had held under the weight of every pressure Roman and Carver and Dante Falcone's men had applied to them. She thought about Martin and Park and Osei working through the night. She thought about Curtis, still at the wheel, 9 years and counting. She thought about the plant on the windowsill that she watered on Tuesdays and Fridays. "You have to be willing to be invisible while you're building it," she said, "and you have to be willing to be seen when it's built. The hard part is knowing which time you're in." The journalist wrote it down and used it as the article's closing line, which Vivian thought was a reasonable choice. Dante Falcone renegotiated the bridge loan on terms that the Ashford Investment Group considered acceptable and repaid in full inside the extended window. He sent a brief note, handwritten, which was how men of his generation communicated things they considered significant. That said only, "I respect a clean operation, DF." Vivian kept the note in the right-hand drawer of her desk, alongside 3 other documents she considered worth keeping. The original Ashford Trust instrument from the year she had set it up. The Kessler Holdings transfer agreement bearing Roman's confident, illegible signature and the diamond bracelet she had been wearing the night she walked out of the party, which she had placed in the drawer on the morning after and had not worn since and did not intend to wear again, but which she kept because it was hers, and it was real, and it had been with her through the whole of it, and she did not believe in discarding things that had been with you through the whole of something. The wedding ring she had left on the table at the base of the staircase. She had no idea what had become of it and had made no inquiry. On a Thursday afternoon in May, 8 months after the party, Vivian Ashford sat at her desk in the Midtown office with the May light coming through the window and the plant in its corner, doing its quiet, patient work. And she reviewed the quarterly reports for 4 of the investment group's subsidiary entities. And then she closed the reports and sat for a moment in the particular silence of a person who has finished something and has not yet picked up the next thing. She thought about nothing specific. She let the silence be silence. The The city moved outside the window with its permanent, indifferent, sustaining roar, and the plant caught the light in the specific way that growing things catch light, fully, without reservation, using everything available. And she sat with her hand still on the desk and breathed, once, slowly, all the way in and all the way out. Then she reached for the next file, because this was what real power had always looked like, underneath the theater of it, underneath the guns and the rooms, and the men who performed their authority like a thing that required an audience. It looked like work. It looked like a woman at a desk on a Thursday afternoon, doing the next thing, and the thing after that, and building, always building, something that would still be standing when the noise was over and the night had passed, and the morning came, as it always did, indifferent to who deserved it and available to whoever was still there to meet it. The morning always came. Vivian Ashford intended